And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. What a fantastic crowd we have out there and the ideas from already. Of course, tonight I am joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Olivia, strange days have found us. Strange days have tracked us down. We certainly are in some very unusual circumstances as we open up the 2025 year. We have a new administration, of course, and just so many things going on in the world, and the clashes are becoming more and more evident. But behind it all, some kind of symmetry of mystery schools and secret societies having a kind of battle there in the background that's been ongoing for almost 200 years. And we're going to get into how all that plays into the visions of the Austrian mystic, Rudolf Steiner, who gave us so much through anthroposophy and spiritual science. Tonight, his visions of AHRIMAN and the Powerzone left mystery school. Sort of the guys who are up to no good, as it were, using all the same methods as those who would move the culture forward. We're going to get deep, deep, deep into this tonight in the special episode X-Series 189. This is the episode Rudolf Steiner, Powerzone Mystery School's 8th Sphere AI Vision. And the 8th sphere becomes very important. Of course, it's a concept which we've gone into deeply on this show, but tonight we're going to go even deeper. And it's going to be very apparent that we're in the kind of era of the 8th sphere. And so much of the things that Steiner gave us as an outline become almost a warning for the 21st century, as if he were reading the headlines of the day, sitting back there in 1920 from his lofty perch. And we're also going to be taking your questions tonight in the second half of the program. And I want to remind you that Miss Olivia will put all those together as we're going, so you can ask them anytime. And before I go any further here tonight, Miss Olivia, how you doing out there?
Great. Jason Finlow says, hi, DJ. Exciting times we live in right now. So pumped for the show. And Terry Doherty says, what a time to be alive and aware.
Well, it's just incredible. And, you know, with all the things going on with the new administration, I want to say in general that there's a lot of jumping the gun with things that they might do or may not do. And it's understandable. But in general, you wait till the first 100 days are in to kind of give that scorecard of how these guys are doing. So everything right now is premature. It's really a month in. And sometime around May 1st, we'll have a real sense of how these things are hitting in terms of the administration and the great changes that are coming about there, things that are working, things that are not working, and all the great plans that they have. Of course, one of the most significant things is that President Trump is going to set up this meeting in Saudi Arabia with Vladimir Putin about ending the Ukraine war, which is something that Putin has indicated could happen over the course of 6 months, not as immediately as some had thought. But it's been ongoing, and the cost of life in the Ukraine, with all the life going out and all the defense contractors getting rich, has just been a plague on the public consciousness long enough. And interestingly enough, it is the forces in the mainstream media that are trying to prevent this from happening, because they're being pushed by those who put them into their position in the first place. So we have a lot of shaking out going on. And I would say the fireworks are pretty dramatic. At times, the whole thing looks like Animal House a little bit. But nonetheless, good things happening along the way. And I think a more kind of a serious cabinet there, consisting of RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, and now Kash Patel. They have Patel in there at FBI too.
Thank goodness.
That's a good lineup, and it's something that Trump didn't have so much in the first go around. So this is significant. The games that are being played around the UFO file as we open the year are quite interesting, and I am going to give a capsule opening on that before we go in earnest into the mystery schools and Steiner's vision. Of course, I want to mention to you also that if you're new here, I want to remind you to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. That's a free newsletter, but it keeps us in touch through the really Machiavellian heavy-duty censorship that we've been seeing going on with the show and everything that we do here at the X series. And interestingly enough, as you know, of course, this is the X steganography series. the steganography part, and I got so much of the steganography from studying Johannes Trithemius, who shows up in this episode in a most unusual way as we contemplate these years that the mystery teachings have given us. In this case, Trithemius gave us 1879 as a crucial year, and thereby aligned himself with a lot of things that Steiner had seen about these years. But the years as they roll out: 1841, 1879, 1936, 1998, and 2001, and then, of course, 2030. All of these years, and I could go on with that list, but these years have significant meanings for different reasons. Some of them Earth changes, some of them changes in consciousness, some of them planetary changes, but they're all laid out there in such interesting and perfect order by the mystery schools. We're going to study those dates tonight as well. I mentioned right up above board there that there was a whole thing about these UFO file shenanigans going on by the Central Intelligence Agency. And it's interesting because now they're really locking themselves into the Hollywood picture on this and using the discredited counterintelligence agents who've been pushing this false, really the UFO file threat. But the threat narrative got changed now. They're trying to, they're playing into a lot of the things that are getting out there through this show and through the ideas room. They're talking a lot about psionics now. Oh, the psychic interface between UFOs and, Lou Elizondo. This is very interesting because they really, in order to get their whole sky event, their sky emergency, their continuity of government, emergency powers action, they had to back off from being so overt with the threat narrative around the UFO thing because it got exposed. And it is the power, again, of even a show like this, which at times can act as a lone outpost on some of these things. And at times we have incredible friends and support. But what happens is when you get a field that, like the UFO field that just got invaded by these people, you start to watch the tentacles of how this works. And it's funny because there's a section tonight about Steiner and these various tentacles that he describes that certain groups that are associated with the left-hand mystery schools use, this power zone. I see a lot of that in the UFO field, and I've made it really a serious commitment to expose that, and so we've done that. We'll do more of that tonight. One of the things that I think is disturbing is the use of people like Steven Spielberg, and they now just announced that the people who put together Top Gun Maverick are using Grush as a consultant. This is what happens, basically the intelligence agencies put you on a fast track and they infest media with their different people. And the greatest offenders, of course, are people like Mellon and Elizondo. And in fact, the thing that they're pushing out there now, which is called Age of Disclosure, and it's Age of CIA Disclosure should be the real name. Just like Lou's book was called Imminent, I said the real title should be Imminent BS. I want to spotlight this because I think it's not, there's a group of people, they're really starting to understand this. And then the people who are uninformed, who are sort of cheerleaders for the CIA takeover of the UFO file, really need to get it, that you're dealing with a CIA, NGA, NRO people. And so let's start with this. Steven Spielberg's reportedly UFO-related movie doesn't even have a name yet, but it has a release date. Supposedly the name of the movie is Disclosure. And the sources that I have on this say that the Elizondo is central in this production. Now, and Mellon is in there too. So, we've got this whole Mellon Elizondo thing, and whatever happens with these movies or whatever, I don't think that the whole movie side of things can really get you very far when it comes to this. But I do see this lineup closing in of them trying to use Hollywood now to steamroll these really bankrupt counterintelligence narratives that the intelligence community is putting out there. And it's dangerous in this sense that for the people in the public who don't know very much about the topic, they'll feel like they're getting informed when in fact they're getting sort of
misinformed.
Misinformed and brought into a mindset about this that comes directly out of the worst aspects of our intelligence community, which, as we know, has a lot to answer for, and it's very hard, even with this administration, I think, to make them answer for it. And that, years and years of everything from assassination to drug running to overthrow of different countries. So that's really an intelligence community gone wild. And a lot of the problem, I think, when we look, you get a lot of deep state researchers who really understand this, as I've put across, and I think we need to adopt some of their understanding when you get around the UFO file area, and you're going to get very far when you do it. So this is Age of Disclosure, UFO documentary touts biggest discovery in human history. And the film is by Dan Farah. And I mentioned on the previous show that Dan Farah is the book agent. He's the publicity agent for Lou Elizondo. This gets pretty incestuous. He's the producer and director of this thing. And guess who it stars? Elizondo and Mellon. So that, this interweaving of this stuff, supposedly now he's going to represent the quote unquote whistleblowers who are coming out with other book deals and all this kind of stuff. So this is the other half of that. So you have the Spielberg part of that's coming out next year. This thing's coming out now. And, they're really adopting, they're pumping the money in on the intel side into this whole thing. Now, I found out something out. There's a guy on Twitter, on X there, who Red Panda Koala, who has been doing a lot of really good reporting on there. David Grush is a consultant on the new Jerry Bruckheimer, Joseph Kosinski UFO thriller. Now, they're the group that did Top Gun Maverick, and they have this whole thing coming out about the UFO file. And, and they're using Grush in there. And what's interesting is, Grush was a weird case because, anyone familiar with this show and my conversations with him, you're going to go through this whole back and forth that we had behind the scenes where he said, Christopher Mellon was preventing him from talking to me, basically. But it's very interesting to me because this move towards Hollywood and the adoption of the false counter-intel propaganda of Mellon and Elizondo filtering through different people into this is something to watch. And again, I've considered their activities dangerous in this sense, that they are, they're a wing of the intelligence community masquerading as whistleblowers. So I've exposed Elizondo's not a whistleblower, Mellon's not a whistleblower. These people work for the government. They're still getting paid by the government. And that's even very important for us to consider, that they're paid disinformation agents. So you can't get around that. I want to point out that the foundations of all this come from very high-level CIA people, including Jim Semivan, who started TTSA, and he started it with Mellon. They were the ones who announced Grush. Not Grush, I'm sorry. They were the ones who announced Elizondo. And Hal Puthoff was part of that group, who's been, doing things at the CIA for over 50 years. Oddly enough, I thought Grush was one of the more sort of truth tellers of the bunch, but he was wrapped up with the liars. And so that's, the company you keep becomes a problem. But this group, it has to be noted, these are the ones now infiltrating Hollywood with the false UFO threat narrative, pretending to be whistleblowers, and, we have to get that government, get that government to tell the truth when they are the government. Elizondo's the government, Mellon's the government. These are government people. And it has to be kept in mind over here. You have Jay Stratton. He's from Radiance Technologies here. He's in there. That's Marco Rubio's now the Secretary of State. They got him roped into this. And Rubio, he himself had been sort of, controlling this wing of, let's get a UFO UAP defense office going through Congress. And so he was doing that in the Senate. So there's some force going on in the background there saying, this kind of breakaway group is in the background saying, whispering UAP into the ears of these Congress people and senators. So they feel like there's some gold rush coming in relation to this new technology. The way they want to roll it out with a story becomes the problem, and their narrative's a problem. And I'm going to get into exactly how that works as we get into this tonight. It is X Series 189. That is the Powerzone Mystery School of the Left. This is Rudolf Steiner's vision of the Eighth Sphere, AI, and AHRIMAN. We're going to take your questions in part 2 of the program, as I mentioned, and Miss Olivia is going to be putting those together. We're going to go about 2 hours with you here tonight. Before I go any further, Miss Olivia, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, there's an explanation there for why they didn't tell us anything. They are not whistleblowers; they're profiteers.
Yes.
They were saving information for the book deal and the movie deal.
Yes, right. And they needed everyone else to promote them and like dangle them on all these podcasts with, oh, I wish I could tell you that, but I'm under national security oath. There's going to be more of a reckoning. I'm starting to see it. There are starting to appear cracks in this whole thing. Now, there's a new committee, as you know, who are going to study the JFK records release. And supposedly the record release is going to be March 27th. Now, that's the date I have. And what they should have done, literally, is put all the records out, and then they can have the committees kind of follow up on it. I hope they do something like that and don't drag it out through committee, but I think something like live investigations with their Senate committee could be good in relation to the JFK file if they bring out the aerospace aspect involved in this, which we've demonstrated in multiple documentaries and multiple shows. The UFO file is in the heart of this, and the experimental technology, boils right down to every last measure of the case. Now, it's interesting because a lot of people have said to me, well, it doesn't matter what's in the CIA records. And I've put it on record that I think that Robert Kennedy, with his meeting with the CIA director immediately after the assassination, put something in those records that could not be deleted so easily, and that would set off bells and whistles in the Justice Department. So I think that's why this has all happened, and those records have been kept behind that wall of secrecy so heavily. The records that are from the Jim Garrison investigation, the records including George Joannides, who was the intelligence official who ran, he's the psychological warfare expert, the top one that we had at the time. He created the Oswald Project, but later he became the liaison with all the Kennedy committees throughout the 1970s as the person who would block things for the CIA. And I've pointed out before that Bobby Inman gave him his Career Achievement Medal for the CIA, and Inman was the first deputy CIA director to go on record about the UFO files, saying not only do we know what the craft are, but we know who's flying them, which is very, very interesting. And I think the panel that Anna Paluna Luna has going on there, she should have Bobby Inman. They should really have him under oath and ask him some key questions about Joannides. That would be a way of interfacing the JFK file secrets with the UFO file secret, and that you could really get some kind of an earthquake there with a figure like that. Of course, he's not the only one, and he is, I think, probably 91 at this point. But that's the kind of thing that you're going to need to do. And I've heard, so she's leading it up, and she apparently has a great interest in this. I did look at the people they recruited on the Republican side to be on the panel, and some of them, like Nancy Mace and Luna Burchett, Lauren Boebert, Eric Burleson, a lot of these people that have kind of evinced an interest in this over time. You could get, if you can stay away from the whole false whistleblower trip, and you can get real hardcore information related to aerospace and secret aerospace projects and how far they've been going on. And I highly recommend you use all our material in the Blue documentaries to get to the bottom of what this is about. So we've got task force to expose federal secrets on JFK assassination, Epstein, UFOs packed with GOP rebels. There is a little bit of a mistake to just roll everything into some gigantic burrito of, hey, we're going to get a bunch of answers on everything. Go after the JFK files, and really you can get so much. It can be such a political earthquake that I think it would be crucial to do that. And you're going to find that the assassination of the president's brother, Robert, is connected directly there. And you're also going to find deep, deep aerospace connections in relation to that through Skunkworks. So these things are related and should be taken in a as a kind of interface that you're going to find in the middle of the secret aerospace project, the assassination program. Those two things are going to go hand in hand. And that could make a very, very interesting committee. And I hope that they go that way. This one says Anna Paluna Luna to lead task force on declassification of JFK assassination records. This is going to be a watermark, a benchmark in time about these things. And so I highly anticipate there will be some revelations there. The thing to watch out for is the Central Intelligence Agency spinning this away as some kind of a state actor like Russia or something like that, and the mafia, which, we've been in the case over the assassination happened 61 years ago. And there have been researchers that have lived and died investigating this thing. Go to the heart of the matter with the JFK assassination. And first of all, show the intelligence corridor of the people who were around the assassination and their complicity in the assassination. Two, open up the aerospace aspect if you want the truth. And that'll lead you directly into the UFO file. That's the crucial aspect that's been missing in that research. And of course, it's been in the heart of the things that we do here on this program. And this article from Intelligencer, when will the declassified JFK files be released publicly? Oddly enough, this article raised a few good points about certain records that are involved there. And this is interesting because in an op-ed, a former New York Times reporter argued that the commission release of documents could be a disappointment. Quote, the order contains loopholes that could delay the release of any documents indefinitely. And in the first term, loyal Trump-named appointees at the CIA and FBI and elsewhere will almost certainly try to persuade him to continue to withhold some material on national security grounds. Oddly enough, even though it's a weird source, I do see the point here, which is that this can't be any kind of half measure. You have to, following up on the spirit of the executive order, you're going to have all of the documents, including the Garrison documents, including the documents for George Joannides, which have been in court for 20 years.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
Conrad says, DJ often mentions that RFK could have put something in the records that couldn't be erased. Could DJ give an example of how he could have set something like that?
Well, if you study the background of Robert Kennedy, he did things like this all the time. And he would like to corner different types of situations in ways. You can see it in his mafia investigations and his committee work. He was incredibly clever. He's one of the smartest people who ever held the title of attorney general or senator, and he would have made a fantastic president. The thing about Bobby is he was aware immediately of the CIA's involvement, and he said, I questioned him, the CIA director, at that point. He said, in a way that he couldn't lie to me. Now, people have wondered about that. Is it a lie detector or what was it? But I think what he was suggesting in that meeting directly after the assassination with CIA Director McCone, who, JFK really had not really fond feelings about him. But what Robert Kennedy did is he made it so that the CIA's entry in the record contained something, some item that would set off bells and whistles if they removed it. And he went ahead and sent to our counterparts in Russia at the time saying, because they were writing and saying, we had nothing to do with this. And he said, don't worry, I know. And, Jackie knows. It was President Kennedy was felled in a domestic conspiracy. So he understood it was based here from the inside. It was an inside job. And when you get around the JFK assassination, you have to look at it on a number of levels, there were a number of forces that were opposed to Kennedy continuing. And he had uprooted so much of our military industrial complex and wanted to change us from a wartime economy into a peacetime economy. So, things like the Vietnam War, invading Cuba, and all those things were off the table. But also, he didn't want to militarize space. And his orders at the end were all about calling off the space race, joint moon missions, going before the UN and saying we should do this with the Russians. The group that put together the secret aspects of the space program and the advanced technology we were working on, including the paperclip guys, they didn't want anything to do with overtures like that to the Russians, who they just had spent World War II killing upwards of 25 million of their soldiers. And, so it was anathema to them, and they started to think of Kennedy as conveniently as a national security threat for their purposes. What he was doing was building a world of peace, and so you wouldn't have any Cold War, and so all of that military realization would be gone. Their martial philosophy was totally different than what Kennedy was doing. Now, that type of battle, even though they usually stay behind the scenes, was actually starting to play out publicly. And shortly before the Kennedy assassination, a very well-respected New York Times writer named Arthur Kroc had put out an article about the CIA just disobeying the executive branch and not paying attention to Kennedy's orders, and how it was getting very uneasy, and the presence of the CIA in international matters, doing their own bidding and openly flouting the orders of the president was compared to a malignancy in the country. So that's before the assassination. So it was known that this was going on in the background. And of course, immediately after the assassination, you have former President Truman, who put together the Central Intelligence Agency in 1947, the National Security Act. He writes a month to the day of the assassination an op-ed in the Washington Post saying, the CIA mend it or end it. It was never supposed to be anything like this, and it's casting a dark shadow over our bright nation and all this stuff. So, and they try to really push him around as a result of that. But we have to remember the context of the Kennedy assassination, which is there's a major aspect having to do with secret aerospace. And if we can get that, it's sort of the linchpin in the middle of the whole thing. And certainly good investigators have researched the battle between, these lawless aspects of the deep state going after the Kennedy administration. Professor Peter Dale Scott calls it the first deep state revolt against the White House, and that's absolutely the right way to think about it. The only thing that's been missing, I think, there's been an overemphasis on, in traditional JFK research circles, there's been an overemphasis on the mafia and an overemphasis on Cuban aspects. They're important to understand on the low operational level that they were, but the people they were taking orders from were the intelligence community. That's pretty clear. Yeah, great. You got another one?
I do. Mark O'Loughlin wants to know, does Representative Luna know about Douglas Caddy's claim about JFK?
I don't know. I sent some stuff to her and Burchett, and having to do with the whole manipulation of the UFO hearings by the Mellon Group. And so to the extent that they have that information, it's true that Caddy, being the former Watergate lawyer, could testify in this, and he's still active. He's still out there, and he would make an excellent witness in all this. The Caddy story is crucial because he's a historical figure, and he was very close to Hunt, who was the top CIA guy in the Kennedy era. So, for Hunt to share with him in private that Kennedy was assassinated over the UFO file, is a major, major headline because, just by his historical standing alone, having been the lawyer for the Watergate 7 and Hunt's lawyer, this is a big deal, especially since it was something said in private. So, nobody could ever say, well, that's just the CIA lying to the public or something like this. Is two best friends talking to each other before one goes to prison. So, when Caddy asks him, why was Kennedy assassinated? And Hunt says, well, John Kennedy was assassinated because he was about to give our most vital secret over to the Russians. And Caddy says, what was our most vital secret? I don't understand this. And, That's when Hunt said it was the UFO file. So
The alien presence.
the alien presence, exactly. And when you think about this, you have to really open up this aspect of it. You know, we just lost this Harold Malmgren character. He passed away last week, unfortunately. I had some conversations with him behind the scenes on Twitter, and I tried to get him to come out for a full interview. I think there was a group in New York that interviewed him before he passed away, but apparently they didn't get very much from him. But nonetheless, in the heart of him tweeting about his experience of being involved in the JFK assassination, which is, you know, there's no question about his presence there, he said that he was briefed on UFOs and otherworldly technologies by Richard Bissell, who's been a real major spotlight on this program because of his association with the UFO File, Project Blue Book, and being Dulles' right-hand man, and Kennedy firing both Bissell and Dulles. You know, part of that, we understand the Cuban Missile Crisis being the reason, the Bay of Pigs being the reason for firing Dulles, for sure. But Bissell going, in my opinion, is the reluctance to give real briefings around the UFO file. That's why Bissell got the axe. So it's very important that Malmgren, before he died, and it's a weird thing with Malmgren because 3 years before he even became public, I did an episode on his daughter, Pippa, who seemed unusually well informed on UFOs. And she was, but she was associated with these think tanks that were like Bush people and stuff. So it was a weird mix there. But I'm glad that Malmgren came out at the end of his life and did this. And he showed again Kennedy's involvement with the UFO file. It has to be explored by that committee. And they can really explode the whole thing wide open as long as they stay away from ridiculous things like Immaculate Constellation. Hey, how did that pay out? Mm-hmm. How about the super egg from News Nation? You know, stay away from the really bad reporting on this, Russ Coldhart, all that, and guys like Schellenberger who just don't know anything about the UFO file. That's the problem there. And stick to really hardcore aspects that can open up, one, the secrecy of the Central Intelligence Agency around its agents that were in place at the time. Joe Anitti's absolutely crucial. And all of the Garrison files in that whole end of the investigation, because Garrison accidentally, backed up into the AEROSPACE connection. And it's very important. He put it on the record that it was the aerospace wing of the military industrial complex. And then it was Fletcher Prouty, who I have a quote from tonight, who worked, after all, as the liaison between CIA and the Joint Chiefs. I mean, come on, can you get a better position? And he thought it was the aerospace aspect.
Clear Vision 322 says, DJ, what is your read on Luna? Seems like she's going to be used for disinformation. And CC says, will the JFK file contain any classified documents from other investigations or only FBI files?
No, the FBI files are new. This is a weird thing. There was an instant, kind of reaction from the FBI. They weren't even after FBI stuff. They were talking about, give us CIA records and other things. And the FBI was like, oh, we just discovered 2,400 files dealing with the JFK assassination. There was a group inside the FBI I reported on. I did an episode 2 weeks ago called The FBI and the UFO File that has this information about this group that has not been, nobody's ever explained anything about them. Totally brand new revelation about a UFO group working inside the FBI. Now, I've tracked a UFO group going all the way back to the 1950s doing this, but this UAP working group inside the FBI, they got freaked out because it was interesting because Trump was saying, well, I'm cutting all these people from the FBI, and there's a questionnaire about were you involved in J6, because there was a lot of provocateur activity going on there. And the Trump administration was trying to get to the core of that. And when he hit on the J6 FBI agents, he rattled this FBI working group on UFOs. So no one even knew that they existed. This got leaked through Ryan Graves. So I did that story a couple of weeks ago. If you want to watch that one, you'll get more of the background on that. But it's significant for a lot of reasons. I mentioned Prouty, so I want to give this quote here. I'm going to do a lot of quotes tonight. I have a very special quote of Steiner and spiders tonight that is really going to give us some idea of what AI is all about. But this is from Fletcher Prouty, and since we're talking about JFK, this might open up our minds a little bit about this. Now, when he republished his classic book called The Secret Team, he put a new introduction in there, and this is what it said. This is the fundamental game of the secret team. They have this power because they control secrecy and secret intelligence, and because they have the ability to take advantage of some of the most modern communication system in the world and global transportation systems, with the full support of a worldwide U.S. military supporting base structure. They can use the finest intelligence system in the world, and most importantly, they've been able to operate under the canopy of an assumed ever-present enemy called communism. Remember, this is 1997 where he's writing. The Soviet Union has fallen, but he presided, when he was in there, all the stuff about the Cold War, they could use communists as an excuse for anything. He goes, it will be interesting to see what enemy develops in the years ahead now that we don't have communism to go after as much. It appears, quote, it appears that UFOs and aliens are being primed to fulfill that role for the future. To top all of this, there's the fact that the CIA itself has assumed the right to generate and direct secret operations. This is fascinating to me because Prouty in 1997, who had been part of, the National Security Action Memorandum 57 and 55 in the Kennedy administration to try to strip all the power out of the Central Intelligence Agency, he's going back here at the end. And if you go into his history, you'll see him interviewing all these pilots who saw UFOs and things. He knows that inside that military structure, they are prepping the UFO File Threat Emergency Powers Program. He puts it on the record. So a lot of the real quality people from the inside have put this on the record. And the fact that, we've taken it and really run down the field with it, there's a really strong foundation for these intelligence community groups using an assumed sky event, a threat from above, as a pretext to assume continuity of government emergency powers. This is such a crucial thing, and I think if we get more people to talk about it, bring it more into the public eye, it'll be greeted much more suspiciously when it comes about. But in terms of what someone asked there about Luna, is she serious and all that, all I can say about Luna is keep an open mind, and we'll see how the panel goes. But as far as Congress goes, I can't think of anybody else they could have in there aside from the people they mentioned. They haven't mentioned the Democrats yet, God forbid. But we know that we have this group coming, and Nancy Mace oversaw the UFO hearing in November that had the disastrous Immaculate Constellation non-revelation. So she has to be, she has to realize when she's being shined on by intelligence people. But otherwise, I think there's a possibility we could get something out of that. And I also think that some of the things that we're seeing about Trump and Putin getting together and getting around this structure of the media and Zelensky promoting, more Ukraine war and more Ukraine war, we could be looking at, just the leaders dealing with this stuff themselves. And so I would ask that this congressional committee not even bother in terms of the media so much, just get to the points and gets to the fact. And it's very interesting. The encouraging thing I will say about the declassification panel that Luna is running is her own comments were, this time we don't want whistleblowers. When we investigate the UFO file aspect of this, we want evidence. That's a much better approach because, guys like Chris Mellon and the CIA have lined up endless whistleblowers who will tell you anything you want. Of course, there's the Eggman, the guy who's in love with the egg ship and all that stuff, and his whole story that went down the drain. It wasn't even his egg video. And they try to promote this stuff, but the CIA is on the move, and the whole intelligence apparatus is on the move through Hollywood with this. And that becomes I think, a dangerous factor in the middle of all this. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. This is X Series 189. It's the Powerzone Mystery School, Rudolf Steiner's version, his vision of the eighth sphere, AI, and AHRIMAN. We're going to be taking your questions in the second half of tonight's program. I'm going to read some very fascinating quotes and also give you a background and an outline of this mystery school war. Really, it's been going on since 1841. So let's say we'll do about a half hour, 45 minutes, the presentation, then we'll go into your questions.
Okay.
What do you got there?
Travis Blake says, DJ, what's your take on what Greer is saying? His message seems to match up with what you're saying about Kennedy. Do you think he's another distraction like what you're speaking about News Nation?
Well, Greer, I mean, he's been really featured a lot, kind of saying the same thing recently, putting that message out there. So, the thing that's good in relation to Greer's stuff is that he's aware that the paid disinformation, Elizondo, Mellon, this whole thing, he's aware of that. And so anyone who's on that tip, I agree with. So I just stress the agreement there. And what I would say is that, you've got, it's a real hard line in the sand when it comes to the intelligence infiltration of the UFO file. People who are signing on with it, we've discussed them before many times, but the more they get sucked into that, the less and less the actual researchers who want to get to the bottom of this have in common with them. So I think there's a big split there, a total bifurcation in the field. So there's the UFO file research. That's the real thing. There's a background to it. People like Stanton Friedman, the late Stanton Friedman, the late John Mack, really sincere researchers who, since we lost them, this whole thing went off and the UFO came in with money and Netflix and all this stuff. I think that people are becoming more and more aware that this thing is going on. And our charge, our duty in all this is to let people know who are interested in the subject that it's being heavily manipulated by counterintelligence officials, and that you can have the real UFO file research, which has to do largely with the public and how they investigate it. It has nothing to do with the government, in fact. You could hopefully get things out of the government, but the government is, and the intelligence community would be the last place you'd want to go for any kind of honesty around this. They've spent years perfecting the ability to conceal it. So that's always been my big laugh with all the researchers who sign on, the intelligence community types. And the fact that you have people like Semi Van, who's a 25-year veteran of the top echelon of the CIA. I mean, this guy is untouchable. He wasn't even, before 2012, no one even knew he existed. That's how secret his work was. And he's in the middle of all this. No, that's a total, you're going to get counterintelligence narratives for counterintelligence purposes. This is all there is to it. So I think a good first rule when you get around the UFO thing is no CIA, no NG8, none of that. No NRO, no. I think it's a real good hard, fast rule. Go directly to people involved. And if you have people that are in that government process and want to come out and talk about things, it's pretty easy, for them to come out and say their piece and all the rest. But I think that this lineup of the News Nation false promotion of these things is a real low point in the subject. It's spilling over into Hollywood because they see the potential there, because they know the great interest. I think in 2017, the top search of anything for Google and everything else was UFOs. That's what I think launched the false whistleblower, Elizondo, New York Times, Leslie Kean, all that stuff, which was all bogus. And the entire article has been deconstructed, including the films. So that whole thing was just an entire intelligence op. You were in the middle of a psyop with it. And they rolled it out heavy during COVID because people were sitting back in their home. What are you going to do? Well, here's the real emergency. As I've said before, the UFO file threat, emergency powers push will make COVID seem like a walk in the park. That's my way of saying it. All right, who would be behind such things, you wonder? Could it be a secret society maybe a mystery school gone wrong, as it were. How about something called the Powerzone? Let's discuss who they are and exactly where that reference comes from and what their activities might be now, here in 2025. Everyone, I want to remind you, if you are new here, to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. It's a free newsletter, but it keeps us in touch, and it will let you know about the exciting X-Series episodes we have coming up for you, interviews that will blow your mind coming up over the next couple months, and the documentaries. Of course, our latest documentary there with JFK, The Final Speech, very well timed with everything that's going on. That's the deep research there. We have a docuseries, Hacking Atlantis, the CRAZE in the HOTZONE. We're filming more episodes of that. We just got done filming some more. And we have more of that coming out. All of it is there at your fingertips, that newsletter. So it's darkjournalist.com. Sign up. It's a free newsletter, and we'll let you know what's happening, including very special events coming up later this year. Before I jump in, Miss Olivia, what do you got?
Everybody's excited about this term, power zone.
Oh, watch out.
Now, you didn't know about this. This is new information, right?
No, I brought up Powerzone 2 years ago.
Okay.
But I decided to really go in depth on what they were so I could give us some idea of how they might be operating now. The information we're getting from Steiner about the Powerzone is from 1923. And what I found, if you track that, though, you're going to look, when Blavatsky goes deep into this, Rudolf Steiner, who started anthroposophy and spiritual science, and was originally part of the Theosophical Society, which really, the Theosophical Society was a public mystery school and fundamentally changed the paradigm and the trajectory of society and culture, introducing things like reincarnation, psychic experience, life after death, meditation, ascended masters. All of this stuff comes directly from that move. And if you go back before Theosophy, so the Theosophical Society is founded in 1875, but if you go just a little bit behind there, you're going to find things like the Fox sisters and the Poughkeepsie Seer and this big wave of Emma Britton and other psychics who were bringing forward this idea of spiritualism and talking, having seances and interacting with the other world, Summerland, the land beyond death and things of this nature. A really hardcore mystical sensation that really started late in the 1840s and really went heavy there right through to the late 19th century and early 20th century. And then it transformed into something else. And it's very fascinating to see the progression, but to know that it was planned out and that certain aspects had gone wrong for people who were planning it becomes very, very interesting. But what happens in the middle of all that is that the mystery schools around 1841, there's a minority of mystery schools in 1841 who are looking out ahead, and they see the advent of this Ahrimanic scientific materialism creeping into the culture. And they say, oh my God, this is going to overwhelm humanity. It won't be recognizable in 100 years. We have to let out secrets that we have kept for thousands of years, literally. And there are traditionalists in there, and there's a whole breakdown of how these groups work. But some of the traditional arcane schools, their whole goal is to maintain the information as it is and not to give any of it out, ever. But then there were other voices in there that saw what was going to happen, and somehow those voices prevailed. And then there were other groups, which Steiner and C.G. Harrison and others refer to as brothers of the left. What I found when I went just a little bit deep into the brothers of the left is that is the power zone that Steiner refers to over and over again. And they are very deeply involved in politics. They're very deeply involved in industry. And they, basically that whole thing of the world as a chessboard fits them quite well. The problem with the brothers of the left schools and the left-hand mystery school path is that it's all about their kind of instant gratification and using these super sensible skills for the kind of gratification of their vision, whatever it happens to be. And so some people have said that Crowley is a good example of this. I would go even deeper into it and say that, Crowley is kind of like a maverick around this kind of thing. He does, he demonstrates all this abilities doing these ceremonial magic and building the OTO and things like that. But so there's some parallel there, but this group seems to be, they're already holding power, and they are in this interconnected network over time, which I think is the kind of thing that eluded somebody like Crowley, who was such an independent operator. But the idea of using that power, I think, is very important. I'm going to use a couple of quick quotes here from Steiner about the nature of the group. Then I'm going to go back into that buildup of the end of the 19th century, the mystery schools, because by the time it explodes into World War I, we get something very interesting that happens, which is Steiner steps up to the plate and he says, all the secret stuff that we've been doing, I'm going to put out there, because the mystery schools, anthroposophy, everything has failed, because look at the World War that we're in. And he sees the Second World War coming and then some. I'm going to get into some of his predictions tonight as well. I want to say this about Steiner as a figure. I think in terms of integrity and just pure value to the work, there's very, very few that compare in the field to Steiner, who was one of the most articulate, because he was, after all, a scholar and a genius who just also happened to be clairvoyant. And, his life may have gone better in some ways had he not, on the surface, his life would have gone better had he not been involved with these things, which I think were used against him in so many different ways. But building anthroposophy and getting into theosophy and really being a member of theosophy for a decade, he built off of the legacy of Blavatsky. And he would go back, even after people would criticize Blavatsky after her death and all the rest of it, he would still say, look, whatever you want to say in relation to Blavatsky, true initiators stood at the cradle of theosophy in 1875. He knew that there was something very, very special about Blavatsky. And it's interesting about Blavatsky because one of the things that was happening in the War of the Mystery Schools was these groups were going back and forth. Some of the groups trying to put things out, to a certain point, groups put out information about reincarnation, and then they try to bottle it up with these other groups that come out and say, no, you can't talk about reincarnation. Reincarnation is crucial in so much of the mystery work. And when you get into Steiner's work, one of the ways, one of the kind of advantages, the shields that we have in terms of facing off against these Ahrimanic style powers from the astral level and through the technology of the 21st century, is the memory in there of these different reincarnation past lives. And one of the things that these groups are trying to get at, the Powerzone style groups, are the memories embodied in people who've had past lives in Atlantis, when we had a super sensible control over technology and the ability to spiritually manipulate the technology. The reasons that they want to use this and exploit it, this is very deep, because what's happening is on a very dark level. They're trying to find these people and under different facades lure them in to get this information. And this is just one story that I picked up about this that I think plays into it, but it's scientists break through the wall of sleep to the untapped world of dreams. NSF-supported researchers achieved two-way communication with lucidly dreaming people, creating a new method for studying the human mind that might lead to innovative ways of learning and problem solving. It's dangerous information on the level, I know that secret aspects of science inside the intelligence communities have already been studying this anyway. But as a public aspect, they go on in here, it says, well, it's not exactly one small step for man, but that humble mathematical message, 8 minus 6 equals 2, is extraordinary in its own way. The first part, 8 minus 6, was transmitted by a scientist to a place just as exotic as the moon, yet frequented by each of us. The response, too, came from the mind of a sleeping research subject as he snoozed in a neuroscience laboratory outside of Chicago. And it goes in depth into these sleep studies. And sleep studies have been going on for a real long time. If you go back in the 1960s, they had them. But the idea of studying sleep, there was, we want to study REM sleep and all the rest of it. This invasion of the dream realm and seeing how the astral body leaves the body during sleep is part of that research. And it becomes part of this setup for what we're talking about, a kind of eighth sphere invasion of technology. And the concept of the eighth sphere is going to be important for us tonight to look at in direct relation to things like AI and VR and all of these, manufactured universes and manufactured worlds. They haven't quite nailed it down about how to roll this out. But we saw through the things that were happening with Meta and the metaverse and all that kind of thing, that they wanted to build in this idea that you just project yourself out into this other world and you're living in this artificial reality, projecting your consciousness out there. So that's all heavy eighth sphere activity. And the dangerous aspect is disconnecting the soul and spirit aspect of a human being from their physical life and into projecting it into this other thing. That's all very harmonic. And we're going to get into exactly what the danger is with that. I'm going to read here from Steiner talking about the power zone and what some of their goals are. And of course, this book is a series of lectures that are called The Electronic Doppelganger. The idea and the aspect of the doppelganger plays into this heavily as well. I'll see how much of that I can get to in this episode. We did an episode about doppelgangers last summer, but probably we'll do something even deeper on this. But here's just a quick snapshot in here. Quote, we have to consider these other initiates who are known within the brotherhoods as the brothers of the left, which is to say those who exploit everything in the pursuit of power that as an impulse is incorporated into the evolution of humanity. And naturally, these brothers of the left also had all sorts of expectations as to what would make its appearance through spiritualism, which is what I was just describing, the whole Fox sisters, table rapping, medium, seance, intense stuff that was going on there in the 1860s. Yesterday, I remarked that it was the brothers of the left, above all, who held seances with these souls of dead people. For them, what was of most interest was what would result from the spiritist seances. They gradually took control of the entire field, while the well-meaning initiates gradually lost all interest in spiritism and spiritualism, and even felt ashamed in a sense, since those who had not wanted spiritualism from the start told them that one could have known from the outset that nothing good would come of spiritism at the present time. This is how spiritism fell into what you would call the power zone of the brothers of the left. Yesterday, I spoke of those brothers of the left who felt disappointed above all because they saw that what they themselves had initiated by allowing spiritualism to enter the stage might reveal something they really did not want disclosed. I want to tell you how that fits in with the eighth sphere, but Steiner is identifying this group, and it's interesting because politically what would happen is this whole idea of right and left would come into the fore later. And there's something in the whole breakdown of the future where Steiner is talking about the war of all against all, this ultimate harmonic facing groups off against each other. And what happens at its very height is the right side of the human body wars with the left side of the human body. So there's something about this right-left thing in the naming of this. But the power zone shows up over and over again when Steiner is talking about these groups that are hoarding this information and using also these various types of strategies and various types of techniques that are sort of off limits. You know, it's almost like voodoo style rituals when you get into it. Now, something that's quite fascinating, snapshotting from there, is Steiner's looking off into the future about the efforts by these groups and where it's going, is that they, through their Ahrimanic attachment, and Ahriman, again, we've done a number of episodes about Ahriman, but just as a snapshot, is a dark astral force that in Steiner's cosmology attached itself to humanity's evolution and becomes an aspect of our evolution into the future, where it takes us off course and it leads us into a false realm. So the whole kind of, you know, the traditional devil, Satan in a traditional religious literature, that's what Ahriman is. And it's interesting because in Steiner's work, he splits Lucifer and Ahriman very differently. But in the Persian religion, Ahriman is very well known. He's the central evil figure. But his twin, and again, here's your doppelganger aspect, his twin, Ahura Mazda, is the Christ figure. And so as twins, they're facing off against each other constantly. So this Ahrimanic force is the opposite of the Christ figure. And then you have in the middle of all that, this Lucifer figure. So this is how Steiner's kind of almost has this erudite view of how these forces play off against each other. And he often cites Lucifer and the Lucifer gnosis, the knowledge that we gained through Lucifer, as a different aspect than what we associate with the devil, and that is Ahriman. But he also says that the Luciferic forces are a mixed bag. They can work very heavily against humanity as well. And the goal of both Ahriman and Lucifer is to tempt humanity off of that spiritual evolutionary path to be ruled by these forces in the eighth sphere. And the eighth sphere becomes this artificial realm that's being built. And it has the ability to kind of suck people in through their imagination. And, one of the best ways I think to think about it is when you get people really hooked on something, when they're really addicted to something in virtual reality, video games. I see this in so many different ways, but that's a kind of a good glimpse right off the top of what, a kind of Ahrimanic fantasy would be. Very often, for example, that person who's in the stands screaming loudest at the football game, but doesn't do any actual football themselves. They're engaging in this kind of, fantasy of, they're projecting their own fantasy life out into this figures, going back and forth and doing these amazing athletics. So there's an Ahrimanic aspect into this projection of imagination, but much more, I think, sort of detrimental than that is the cold-blooded aspect of, Ahriman has no soul in that sense. And having, sort of implanted himself in humanity's evolution, if you look at Steiner's work and the kind of core theosophy, anthroposophy message, what he's saying is this whole force has the ability to suck humanity directly into the eighth sphere and completely interrupt our spiritual evolutionary track. That's where you get world wars, and that's where you get, humanity being split off from their spiritual roots. So that's where the scientific materialism was leading. And when these groups looked at this in the 1840s and said, we need to do something about it, the battle of those two groups through spiritualism and through the different things that were happening ended up in a resolution between the brothers of the left and the brothers of the right, and these various aspects of the mystery schools through the figure of Helena Blavatsky, who they knew was going to reveal things on a very deep level because of her own mystery knowledge. And that's what we're going to get into next. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is Dark Journalist X Series 189, Powerzone Mystery School, 8th Sphere AI vision of Rudolf Steiner and his visions of Ahriman. We're going to take your questions in, let's say, about another 20 minutes or so. But in the meantime, I am going to lay out more about what Steiner sees coming forward out of this Powerzone left mystery school group. Before I go any further, Miss Olivia, what do you
Heidi
got?
Schultz says, are these the brothers of the left, the same ones that Steiner claimed put Blavatsky in a, quote, psychic prison?
Yeah, you know what's interesting is the group that did that was the darkest of the dark. And it's interesting because Steiner, when he's talking about the occult imprisonment that they put Blavatsky into, so that her wisdom and her ability, her mediumistic talent for grasping the spiritual world was distorted, and that she saw through a glass darkly because of their efforts, that the technique for doing it was not resorted to even by the left-hand schools. So the group that was doing it was, basically the darkest of the dark in all of this. The secret society resided in America. And one of the things that they pulled on Blavatsky to get her out of the country was that she had committed an act against the Constitution. So they used the fact that she was Russian, they used the fact that she was a woman and all the rest of it. But Blavatsky had gone in kind of full gangbusters in America, starting Theosophy. And the bravery, I think, of this act and the fact that these masters were working with her, with the work that she was doing, it was so positive at the outset. And I think it's remarkable benefit that humanity got from the work that she brought forward. What happens is they try to use her when she comes to America. They know who the individuality is. They've tracked her astrologically since birth. This is another aspect that when you get into the mystery schools, you'll notice that Steiner himself has 2 different dates of birth. Gurdjieff has multiple dates of birth. A lot of these spiritual masters do, because they don't want to be tracked astrologically and astronomically and through different numerological mystical methods. So there's always some distortion around exactly where were they born or exactly what the date was. And there's a good reason for that. But in the case of Blavatsky, they had that information and they knew she was coming forward. So by the time she got to America, there was a political group here. And the mystery schools apparently, according to Blavatsky and then Steiner going through Blavatsky's work, that over 80% of the mystery schools control the political process in America. So if you think about that now, fast forwarded into the future, it's probably the whole thing. So there's some secret society aspect controlling everything that you see politically, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So it's important for us to keep that in mind, that there is, even with assassination, which we do so much of on this program, it's not that different than my mystery school studies. As a matter of fact, you're going to find in Rudolf Steiner's work him studying things like the assassination of Franz Ferdinand and other assassinations and linking it directly to this Powerzone group. So they know how to intertwine these different abilities. And these are old, well-known methods deep, deep in the heart of these control grids. One of the things I want to say when you get around Blavatsky in this period is she's bringing forward ISIS, the book ISIS Unveiled, in 1877, and she's starting Theosophy in 1875. When she gets there, one of the representatives of this Powerzone group approaches her and says, we want you to do this, 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 and this. We want you to give us these types of impressions from the spiritual realm, and we want to know about these types of state secrets. And so they're kind of approaching her saying, we'll take you under our wing. And she says, well, I'll join your mystery group, but basically I want to be a member, and so we're going to share everything that we know. And they're looking at her like, no way, and they just want her to do their bidding. And so she says, well, if you intend to do this, then there's a mystery school in Paris, and I'm going to work with them. And not only will they get the benefit of my work, but they'll know everything about you too. And so these people decide, well, she's a real loose cannon. So only 2 years into her doing this, they move towards this occult imprisonment, which keeps her really distracted over the next decade and takes her completely off course. And ultimately, they are sending her false Mahatmas, and her teacher, all of that stuff gets distorted. And they're able to keep her in this state of a kind of a drugged psychic state. Now, it's very interesting, the occult imprisonment aspect of it, because as I said, it's something that's only resorted to by the very darkest of occult groups. So I want to say that those are secret societies, those Powerzone groups doing that. And the idea generally about mystery schools, I don't want to give people the wrong impression about mystery schools, because very often mystery schools are, there's a foundation there going all the way back to Atlantis, Egypt, Pythagoras, the whole thing. There's an incredible lineage, the Rosicrucians. These are all mystery traditions. So they're there for humanity to gain and prosper from. Somewhere along the line, side by side, just like Edgar Casey's story of Belial and Emilius, the Belial group imitates Emilius, and they imitate the Emilius group. And the Emilius group is using their advanced knowledge to communicate with the outer spheres, with the saintly realm. And the Belial group discovers, we can use that very same laser crystal aspect for, lasers and destroying things and domination. So you get this split all the way back there. And so when we come back now into this era, and, you go through things like World War II and all the things that we see happening here in the 21st century, we're coming back to something. It's like the Atlanteans are facing off against this whole battle again. And that's the deep subconscious piece they were talking about earlier, that these groups want to explore and get information from and ultimately exploit. So it's very important, I think, to get a handle on the reincarnation aspect. And so we're going to highlight that in this next section. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X Series 189, the Powerzone Mystery School, 8th Sphere AI, going deep on Rudolf Steiner's vision of AHRIMAN in the 21st century. I'm going to read what he sees coming up for us in the century. And I'll tell you, it gave me chills when I first read it some 20 years ago. And I still get chills reading that one. I always like to bring this out when I'm doing work on Steiner. This is a book that I had in college, and I spilt coffee all over it at the age of 19. And there is the coffee stain and it's Lucifer and Ahriman, Rudolf Steiner's book. That is the same book that I spilled coffee all over, but I still continue to read it. It's still readable, even though the coffee somehow got around it. What do you got there?
So Fuber Fighter's asking, what does DJ think of the historic anti-Slav, anti-Russian bias of both Hitler and the West?
Yeah, there's a lot of spiritual warfare involved in what was going on there. And of course, the Nazis regarded Steiner with incredible hostility, and became the people who burnt down the Goetheanum and really tried to destroy everything that he had built. The Goetheanum, the original Goetheanum that he had built, is such an unusual structure. And although Steiner came back and he rebuilt anthroposophy, they say that he was devastated beyond belief from what had happened. And there were also times when he was giving lectures, when stormtroopers would come in and disrupt and stuff. They saw him as a cult competition, and that's something I think we need to keep in mind when you're looking at Steiner. Steiner is introducing things from a number of different levels. He's introducing biodynamic farming. He's introducing eurythmy. He's got spiritual science. This guy is a cultural revolution, And like so many of these people who are operating on that kind of initiate level, it seems like they have 5 different lives in one. And but they regard him instantly as a threat, and they see we're not going to be able to pull off this really heavy-duty nationalist trip with Steiner around. So, Steiner lives till 1925, so he doesn't see the full impact of the Nazis, but he's well aware of, the Nazis and what's happening there and what's going to happen. And he gives us those hints as we go along. Yeah. What do you got?
Without bounces, getting this out of the way, what are your thoughts on the right/left-hand paths, and is the middle path the way? Any particular school of thought to double-click into? Also, without bounces, the left hand, Lucifer, right hand, Ahriman, middle, Christ?
Well, it's extremes, right? So this is the nature of the problem. So you're going to have those extremes. And I always thought it interesting because I thought, well, if someone's advanced, if they know energetic healing or if they know all these other things, how could somebody be on the left-hand side of things, kind of a black magician type, and have the same access to knowledge somehow? It almost seems like there would be some ethical barrier that would prevent, people from like the Powerzone group of apprehending ancient secrets. But these things have passed down through humanity for many, many years. And the thing is, there's a free will aspect involved in it. I do think that there are ethical guardrails around certain types of information and powers. But nonetheless, I think that there are ways to exploit, esoteric information. As a matter of fact, there are so many dark groups operational around deep esoteric knowledge that you have to say this is, part of the battle that's going on in the background. It's very interesting, when I read Steiner, he gets away from this idea in many ways of the oneness of all things. And he says, it's good that we understand the oneness of all things in relation to nature or God, but you have to understand that when we talk about, for example, elementals, and we know elementals have this very positive impact on the environment and things, and that when we were in different states of mind before modern times, we could see and interact with these beings who are right on the inter-between level. And all the mystery schools attest to them. Of course, there have been psychics like the sleeping prophet Edgar Cayce who interacted regularly when he was gardening and things like that with these different elemental beings. And it's very, very fascinating to me because Steiner's like, but there's a whole group of different types of forces that are all opposed to each other. You have the Elohim, the spirits of form on one hand. You have the Ahrimanic powers, the Luciferian powers. And then in the elemental groups, it's not like they're one big unity either. The aspects around fire spirits are very opposed to the plant spirits. So there's all of this kind of influence pushing and all of these different will aspects involved. And so I think we get a better picture of things when we think about it from Steiner's point of view and the things that he's laying down there, which is he's saying this is a very divided setup. You have a number of forces in the middle of this kind of rolling creation and aspects of creation. So we need to kind of think of it that way as opposed to, it's one big organized group who are all going for positive purposes. It's clearly not. And, but it also can be that you have, these groups kind of vying for superiority in different ways. And at the highest level, when you talk about something on the level of like the Great White Brotherhood, whatever, their entire, the spiritual cloak that they have is that they are trying to help all of creation move forward into that spiritual evolution. So, that's where you might get unity on that level. But everywhere else, I think Steiner is very correct that you're getting all of these groups kind of in opposition to each other. And that includes the Elohim groups and all the things that we've heard about them over the year. It was funny. I used to make fun of the the whole fact that for a while, the alternative media was just hooked on this idea of Anunnaki, and it was obnoxious at a certain point. It's like you could not hear anything else except Anunnaki is the answer for everything. And this is part of the human aspect is when we jump onto something and people just keep going round and round with it and squeeze every drop of inspiration out of it. But when you really think about the story of the Anunnaki, it's just another one of these divisions. It's another group that thinks of themselves as superpowered, trying to come down and exploit the local population. So I think there's a lot to the whole thing about the Anunnaki. And I think that many of these things that we think of as nuts and bolts aliens and things like that operate on spiritual spheres. That's what you get in the heart of the mystery school work, is that is their place, you know. So when you get things about Venus beings or whatever, it's not like physically formed Venusians create spaceships and then come here. You know, we know physically Venus is too hot for that, but it is true that if you get into the mystery school knowledge and you look at the work of Casey and others, for example, they talk about the planetary sojourns and the different things that we do. They're almost like schools or classrooms, developmental rooms that we go through. And then we use all of that and we come back into a physical form here. So we're incorporating all of those things. Casey did say that, you know, on Venus is the closest possible thing that we have to a physical form. But you take on the environment, you know, and if it's a Mercury environment, you're learning the lessons of Mercury. These are the schools. And then when you come back to a lifetime here, you've incorporated all of those schools you've gone through. Now, it's interesting because Steiner goes a step further and says, yes, but with the eighth sphere, what happens is Ahriman has the ability during someone's life to create such a falsehood in their mind about their existence and the reality that they're in, and he creates a false reality so that when they die, they don't go into the normal scope of planetary evolution, then back to Earth. They go into the eighth sphere. They get drawn into the eighth sphere. But then he also talks about, you know, not even waiting for somebody to die to suck into the eighth sphere, that they can be fully conscious now and working in a particular area, that if they get too cold-hearted, if their information gets too based in something that is Ahrimanic, they're building their future into the eighth sphere. And it powers up this environment that the Ahrimanic forces are building. So it's very interesting to me because, you know, when I was very young, and I read Steiner very, very young, the world has developed in such a way that it's such an incredible prediction for me, the way that he laid things out. And I started to understand the whole Ahrimanic aspect so much better with the advent of the technology. And it really started, I was like, oh, you know, you almost have people going up to the podium and saying, I'm an agent of Ahriman. You know, I mean, we're that close to this type of revelation. So, you know, this has gone from very ethereal, cosmological, almost philosophical information to very hardcore reality in a short period of time, of lifetime. I'm going to read you what Steiner has said about something coming up here in our future with that Ahrimanic piece. And then I'm going to do one last thing of the Power Zone and then do your questions. How's that? Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 189, the Power Zone Mystery School, 8th Sphere AI. It's Rudolf Steiner's version and vision of Ahriman and the 21st century for humanity, the challenges of being thrown off and sucked out and disappeared into the oblivion of the 8th sphere, or...
Oh my God. Sorry, I just had a huge realization.
Yes.
Okay, this might take me a second to say, but I realized I said scrolling helps you fall into the 8th sphere. It's really true. And I realized that on X, it's controlled by Mars. But the reason I thought, and obviously Elon has his whole fascination with Mars, but it's this angry war combat zone.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
We know this, but
Absolutely.
Instagram is the exact opposite. And I started an Instagram. I logged it on for the first time in ages, and I hadn't been there, and I realized it's all Venus. And it's all this idealization, or Luciferian, it's idealization, it's all pretty, selling you something, desire, beauty, it's enticing, all of this kind of stuff. So it's exactly the opposite, but both of them lead you into the 8th sphere. I mean, it's taking you out of yourself, out of your identity, out of your heart, and into this mind space where you have to detox from it and come back and figure out where you are in space and time and reestablish your identity, you get lost.
That is interesting. Well, you think about it. If you were around in, the 15th century and you went to see like a Michelangelo painting or something, the environment of the painting itself would open up your consciousness and your senses, right? So the trick is to take the technology and bring those kinds of aspects that will enliven and bring what's latent in the human being in terms of, beauty and impression in things and make that manifested. So, but yeah, unfortunately also, there's a brainwashing thing, there's a mind control thing involved in the technology, the way that we have it. It's unfortunate. And I think it could be a lot better. It could definitely be an awareness building technology. It doesn't have to be like it is, but as it is, it lowers the consciousness to a very dull level, as television also has done. And yet, even in the midst of all that, there are exceptions, of course, which can bring you to a totally different place. I saw some kind of a discussion on the Star Wars movies, and it was funny because all the later Star Wars movies were terrible, as we know. But the original Star Wars movie used so much of the mythical archetypal foundations that it brought forward something very different than the science fiction movie would tend to do. So there is that possibility, even with something that's a blockbuster, to break through to this other thing. And even though it got exploited and turned into all these, woke things later, that original still holds up, I think, just like it is.
Because it's a traditional myth.
Yes.
Placed inside of science fiction. So coming of age, the journey to manhood, empowerment, all of that.
It is the power of myth. Let's talk about the eighth sphere aspect, which apparently is no myth. All right. Steiner has a series of lectures which really go into some deep territory. And the books, an outline of esoteric science, knowledge of higher worlds, they really include so much of the information. I find that the lectures occasionally pierce even further than the books. And so the foundations are there in the books. But sometimes I think that when he's doing the books, he's held back to a degree just by the fact that he's an initiate. And he wants to put something out there in the world that doesn't get exploited. But once in a while, I think he goes even beyond that. And it's kind of a source of his bravery. He's talking here, looking out into the 21st century, if the trends continue from where he is there, right after World War I. And he says it will be quite possible for the men of Earth, if they so wish, to develop a more and more automatic form of intellect, which is exactly what we see happening. But that can also happen amid conditions of barbarism. Full and complete manhood, however, cannot come to expression in such a form of intellect, and men will have no relationship to the beings who would fain come towards them in earth existence from the spiritual realms. And all those beings of whom men have such an erroneous conception of, because of the shadowy intellect can only grasp the mineral nature, the crudely material nature in the minerals, plants, and animals, may even in the human kingdom itself, all these thoughts which have no reality will in a trice become substantial realities when the moon unites again with the earth. And from the earth there will spring forth a terrible brood of beings. Listen closely to this. A brood of automation, of an order of existence, lying between the mineral and the plant kingdoms, and possessed of an overwhelming power of intellect. This swarm will seize upon the earth, will spread over the earth like a network of ghastly, spider-like creatures, of an order lower than that of plant existence, but possessed of an overpowering wisdom. These spidery creatures will all be interlocked with one another, and in their outward movements they will imitate the thoughts that men have spun out of the shadowy intellect that has not allowed itself to be quickened by a new form of imaginative knowledge inherent in spiritual science. All the thoughts that lack substance and reality will then be endowed with being. The earth will be surrounded then, as it is now, with air, and as it is sometimes is with a swarm of locusts, a brood of terrible spider-like creatures, half mineral, half plant, interweaving with masterly intelligence. It is true, but with intensely evil intent. And insofar as man has not allowed his shadowy intellectual concepts to be quickened to life, his existence will be united not with the beings who have been trying to descend since the last third of the 19th century from the spiritual realm, but with this ghastly brood of half mineral, half plant-like creatures. He will have to live together with these spider-like creatures and to continue his cosmic existence within the order of evolution into which this brood will then enter. Think of nanotech, the nanotechnology. Think of artificial intelligence, incredibly clever, but base, not possessing any spiritual substance. One of the things that he says there, what I find it absolutely just devastating, is when he's talking about it, he says, well, you know, it's quite fascinating because what they are is possessed of an amazing wisdom, but they're acting like a swarm of locusts, terrible spider-like creatures, half mineral, half plant. And then if you really think half mineral, you start to think of silicon chips, you start to think of processors. That's the mineral aspect. He's giving us a hint there. The whole idea of the web, of the internet, and
Oh, dear God.
yeah, I mean, he's giving a lot in the middle of all this. And I think it's an absolutely extraordinary, there's more, but I want us to really lock in with what he's saying there. This is the threat of the Ahrimanic technological world without the spiritual balancing off against it. So marching into that scientific materialism, you know, the over dependence on medical science, the over dependence on all of these various things, and the separation, the turning over of one's humanity to experts, and then the experts acting in the background, you know, with these different nano intelligences. This becomes, I think, a real threat to the evolution of humanity from a number of different levels. And I think Steiner's giving us something there that is such a flash 100 years ago. It's remarkable.
So, yeah, and I was thinking about the Matrix and those creatures.
Yes.
The
Oh, yeah,
are
the Matrix.
spiders.
Yeah.
They're metal
Yes.
spiders.
Let me tell you this. The Matrix is largely derived from Steiner's work. When I've reflected back on these things, Star Trek, many of the shows are largely Steiner plot lines, and so many different things in Twin Peaks. I mean, Twin Peaks actually uses the Lodge, White Lodge, Black Lodge, doppelganger thing. It's all Steiner stuff. So I am amazed in a sense that every now and then you hear, like, you know, there's some admission that there are kind of theosophical influences around, but they don't, you know, really Steiner's made such an impression on culture and such an impact. And very often I think people, you know, in the creative space could take those ideas and just run down the football field with them, which is great because they do get around. But I think that really, you know, it's just like in the beginning of the Terminator, it says, you know, ode to the works of Harlan Ellison or whatever. That is something that's very important. I think when you get around things like Twin Peaks, The Matrix, and some of these very deep things, they should all say ode to the works of Rudolf Steiner.
Everybody wants to know what that quote was from.
Well, there's a series of lectures that he gave in Zurich, and the Steiner spiders is how I name the lectures. But there's 3 or 4 different lectures where he talks about this. They're all from 1918, and you know, for me, there's a little more that I'll give you on this. And I have one other quote about AHRIMAN, and then we'll go to your questions. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 189. This is the Powerzone Mystery School, 8th Sphere AI, Rudolf Steiner and his vision of AHRIMAN in the 21st century, giving us so much there back from his anthroposophical perch. And then how has the culture absorbed that information? And if the mystery schools were looking out at how the public had assimilated Steiner's work 100 years later, well, we're going somewhere with it tonight, I think. We're getting some of the feeling and conveying some of the work. And I think it's more relevant than ever. We're going to take your questions here momentarily. Let's see, we're at an hour and 35. So we'll take it in 5 minutes, and then we'll go to your questions.
Okay. Interestingly enough, Tim Houston says Doctor Who battled spiders from Mars. I just asked if that's pre-Ziggy or not. I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah. Right. Well, Ziggy and the Spiders from Mars, that is, that is a remarkable little, it conjures up quite an image. And actually, the whole Martian Messiah aspect with Ziggy Stardust is interesting as well. I mean, that's pretty advanced for rock, was anybody else doing anything like that? They talk about, if you go back into the 60s, there were concept albums like Sgt. Pepper, but Bowie, he was coming from something totally different. I mean, it's quite remarkable. I think that says a lot about him. All right, a little more about this. So after he gives us this heads up that, we're going to have to cohabitate with these incredible creatures if we don't wake up, the ghastly, intelligent spider-like creatures, which very clearly are some type of AI life form. He says, this is a destiny that is very emphatically part of human evolution upon the earth, and it is quite well known today by many of those who try to hold humanity back from the knowledge of spiritual science. Here again, we go to the Powerzone groups. They don't want spiritual science. They don't want the mystery schools, information and work out there in a digestible way that actually makes impact. For there are men who are actually conscious allies of this process of the entanglement of Earth existence. We must no longer allow ourselves to be shocked by descriptions of this kind. Such facts are the background of what is often said today by people who, out of old traditions, still have some consciousness of these things, who then see fit to surround them with a veil of mystery. But it's not right any longer for the process of the earthly evolution of humanity to be veiled in mystery. That is also an earthquake there. Well, let's finish this. However great the resistance, these things must be said, for as I constantly repeat, the acceptance or rejection of spiritual scientific knowledge is a grave matter for all mankind. So Steiner's putting it out there wholly and completely. He's just watched this Ahrimanic World War I, force completely rip it up in Europe and America. And so he's aware of what's coming through this. So he's taking more of the mystery off and saying, you know what? Yes, the mystery schools have kept this information. I've kept this information, but this needs to come out to humanity, because if you don't, you're going to get more and more of this. If they're not aware of this, then humanity will be taken off course and it will be pulled into this Ahrimanic 8th sphere realm. So the question is, what is the attitude that defies this, the things that he's seeing? What kind of answers the warning that Steiner is giving us there 100 years ago? That's what we're going to get into next. But what I'm going to do right now is turn it all over to you, Miss Olivia, and you're up.
My chat just collapsed.
Oh, great.
I don't know what is going on.
No problem at all. I have so much to dig in on here.
I may not have access to it.
Oh, crazy. Okay, take your time.
This has never happened before.
There's no rush. There's no rush. The spiders are going overdrive.
This is creepy.
Locust-like creatures. Okay. I want to say this, that, when Steiner is mentioning Brothers of the Left, I'm like, I wonder, is he the first one who talked about the Powerzone and Brothers of the Left? Now, oddly enough, as I've mentioned before, there's someone who sounds very much like Steiner, but he's writing in 1893, which is 10 years before Steiner's first book. And Steiner will cite him later, this C.G. Harrison, who's presenting these different things for the Berrien Society in London in a series of lectures in 1893. But he does say this, and again, we get the same imagery, but let's go with this a little bit. As under the circumstances, the spiritualists could not be undeceived as to the source of their inspiration. There was no alternative but to withdraw from the experiment. He's talking about the same thing Steiner talks about later, about how these mystery schools get deeply involved with promoting the Fox sisters, setting up circumstances, showing that interface between this other realm, this other reality, and our everyday reality. And they decided at a certain point, because of how it's being taken, that is, you know, very often people are just thinking, oh, our everyday lives are going to be a direct extension of this life. So when I pass into the next realm, it's going to be just, you know, going to work and living in a house and all this other kind of stuff. So they really become concerned about this, and they're like, oh, they're missing the whole connection with this spiritual world. So he's talking about this. Now, remember, the Steiner piece that I was reading from, not about the spiders, but the other part, was from 1913, relating to Blavatsky and this whole wave of materialism in relation to theosophy. And this is 1893, so it's 20 years earlier. So certainly this guy is a big influence, which is why Steiner quotes him so heavily in that book, which is all about Helena Blavatsky. He says, mediumship, especially in America, became a profession, and mediums subject to every kind of psychic influence were largely exploited by brothers of the left. That's the power zone. For their own purposes, the party of secrecy were almost wholly employed in endeavoring to counteract these influences with the assistance of many who call themselves liberals. Now, isn't that interesting? Quite a new name, by the way. When an event occurred which united both parties in defense against a common danger, a person who was known to exist but who had not been discovered suddenly appeared in Paris and presented herself to the occult lodge there and demanded admission into the brotherhood on terms which could not be entertained for a moment by that mystery school. She then disappeared, and the next thing that was heard was that a certain Madame Blavatsky had been expelled from an American brotherhood for an offense against the Constitution of the United States. All of that is in there in 1893 in this work called Transcendental Universe by C.G. Harrison. That is frontline reporting to the Mystery School Wars. And then Steiner picks up on this and enhances it. But the thrust of that is in there, and the whole controversy about the eighth sphere is in there also, which, after all, is exposed by A.P. Sinnott, who is a journalist whose family was a banking family, and he gets involved and he becomes one of, not Besant's, but Blavatsky's disciples. And she starts seeing him do remarkable work. But what happens is very odd. He puts out a book called Esoteric Buddhism, which does better than her books. And it's loaded with all these information, but there's this one particular piece that's in there, which is all about the eighth sphere, calling the eighth sphere the moon. And this is a big, big problem, because it is an attempt by the same group that is trying to put Madame Blavatsky into occult imprisonment. It's an attempt to spin the eighth sphere information before it comes out. Steiner would call the eighth sphere one of the biggest secrets not revealed by the mystery schools. And when it accidentally comes out through Sinnott, through this unusual power zone feeding him information, then it's a big problem, because he misidentifies what it is and compares it with the moon, which is something totally, totally different. And it becomes, you know, it's very difficult for us because we're not mystery school initiates. But the level of fighting about what the eighth sphere is and how it was revealed too soon, and then the nature of the power of the eighth sphere, becomes such a controversy in all that work. It's remarkable, because you have A.P. Sinnott having it out, Blavatsky corrects him in her own book, even though she's the one who put him out to write esoteric Buddhism. She says, no. The eighth sphere is not the moon. And then we have this whole thing about C.G. Harrison in his book, writing for the Berrien Society, saying this eighth sphere information that came out, this is a real problem. And the mystery schools weren't ready for this. And it's been misidentified. It's a real error. And then Steiner comes forward a decade later and says, the eighth sphere was one of the top secrets the mystery schools kept. It was prematurely let out and falsely identified with the moon. And for some reason, all of this is a big, big deal. That's counting over a 25-year period of these major esoteric figures weighing in on this. What is the big deal about the eighth sphere? That's a very important question that we can answer here tonight. But Miss Olivia, first, I'm off to you.
Okay, Food Provider says, arachnids have 8 legs and AHRIMAN pitches the 8th sphere. Twilight Miss says, I find it not to be a coincidence and kind of alarming that many individuals and groups of people have witnessed these spidery type creatures during solar eclipses.
Oh, yeah.
And Karen Carpenter says, did Steiner mention anything comparable to Morgellons or black goo? Max Spears talked about spiders.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he did. A number of people have. And I think it's there's
Are you
kind
going to
of
admit your own experience with spiders?
Well, I will say this. There's a very unusual experience that I had somewhere along the way. And I'll put it to you this way. When getting into any kind of deep esoteric state, I would see something like a spider descending. At a certain point, that spider turned into something that was almost like a buzzing, floating toy, almost like an airplane, like a toy airplane. So those
or
are
a drone, kind of? 'Cause they have them that sort of look like that.
It was clearly from somewhere else, but it had a buzz like it was a toy. So those are kind of inter-between experiences that I had. So there's something certainly about this whole idea of spiders. And so when I think about that, I'm trying to see what we're getting from Steiner on this, because on the surface, we hear about nanotech. On the surface, we hear about AI permeating every aspect of our lives. And we hear about the avatar, and you'll, float your consciousness into this avatar and all these types of things. But what's behind it? What does it actually look like? When you're looking at the misuse by these technological types and the pushing themselves through this scientific materialism trip and assuming power on Earth, there is an harmonic aspect. And again, this doesn't mean technology is bad. I always have to reinforce that. For years, I was an editor of a tech magazine, and I embraced every kind of technology there was and still find it incredibly fascinating. It's just the takeover aspect of the technology, and in the wrong hands, irresponsible hands. I often go to people, like Bill Gates or Elon Musk. These are not spiritually advanced people. They seem to come from the other end of the spectrum. They're working on very harmonic levels. So, I think that this spirit of things takes them over. And I think it could be incredibly dangerous for us to find ourselves in a situation where AI is running the governments. Now, we already know there's a certain amount of that happening anyway, but we should certainly stop any kind of technological takeover of our government. And that has to be a central piece, even though it's being touted at the moment as, a more efficient way to go. So just get honest human beings installed and have them working with the technology. That's a totally different kind of a thing. Yes.
Debbie McAdoo says giant spiders were witnessed in Vietnam by U.S. soldiers. And Jen Passavant says, I've had a client describe a visitation by an etheric mechanical spider. It felt to me like a sentinel for an even more devolved entity. Many people were asking me what color your spider was. Sort of just shadowy dark.
Yeah, there's been a number of those types of things that I've had experiences with. And the only thing I can tell you is the whole drone thing it turns into, or the kind of toy thing, but it has a weird electronic buzz to it. So it's like, it's not insect-like at all. It's very mechanical, oddly enough. But I think that there is something to that. I've heard also about those experiences that people have mentioned in relation to spiders around the UFO file. So I think that there is, I think that there is a connection.
Do you think they are possibly archons?
Well, the problem is, and again, there's a naming problem with some of these things. But I think the realm of activity that you're talking about is right on. Yes.
And if I remember correctly, when you looked at the spider, when you became aware of it and looked at kind of at its right in the face, it would draw back, right?
Well, I'll tell you what's weird, and I don't go into these experiences too much, but I will say this in relation to the spider thing, that having looked at it with my eyes open was a weird thing, because you might have a vision of something when you're meditating or something, but if you see something, then that's quite unusual. So when you look at it, but yeah, it did seem that once I became aware of the thing, it withdrew. So, people have had experiences in relation to abductions and things like that, where the abduction seems to work better, like the aliens are involved in putting them into a deep sleep of a sort. So for me, I think that that's part of the aspect, that if you're not under, then your awareness is out there. What I think is interesting is, instead of it going away like a dream once I woke up, that thing was still there. And so that was like a real crossover from this experience. So I would have to say, when Steiner is talking about spiders interconnecting and being incredibly intelligent through the technology, and obviously being mineral, that also is another hint in all of it. Obviously, through the technology, we're giving entree into this realm of some other type of intelligence that can't enter into the human life wave. This is Gigi Young has done incredible work around that. And I like the terminology there, because they have a problem entering the human life wave, so they have to find a way in. Yes.
CC says the Earth's magnetic field is pictured like a spider. Is the eighth sphere boundaried?
I'm going to read something about the eighth sphere to help answer that one. And, unfortunately, the visual representations of the eighth sphere are scant. But that does lead me to another thing where I think this mystic saw the eighth sphere and didn't know it. Hold on and let me see. Yeah, I'm going to do this way. So there was a character back there who, Steiner, when he was writing out and drawing out what the eighth sphere was, he would draw a circle around the moon and the earth, and he would say eighth sphere. So Steiner was giving us this information, and he was saying, so somehow the eighth sphere operates around the moon and the earth. And if you think about it, on the earth side, it's all of the draining of the imaginations. It's all of the compelling us into a virtual reality, a false reality, disconnecting us. Oh, your spiritual side doesn't matter, right? Scientific materialism is just what can be weighed and measured. And now the next piece of this is going to be, you can't survive without the technology. So human enhancement, the technology is the important thing. Forget about your spiritual life. Forget about your psycho-spiritual connections, and what makes you a human being. Just pay attention to this one side, which is superiority through technology. Very, very dangerous scientific worship going on there. So the eighth sphere is not complete. In fact, it's being built. There are representations of the eighth sphere that I found in that early Montagna, tarot, which existed in Italy in the 15th century. And I see other representations of it very early on. So somebody was aware in the process of doing all this. This is a shot of one of Steiner's masters, who was a gardener when he was a teenager. And Steiner was actually doing very poorly. He became such a genius in school, but he was doing poorly in school. And this gardener came along to him, Felix Kaguska. And Felix is a very interesting character because he opened up the world of esoteric things for Steiner. And Steiner, after doing that and studying geometry and some other things, became one of the greatest students. But what would happen is, and he was regarded, Felix was regarded as a fool. He was kind of the town fool. He did gardening and nobody ever thought of him intellectually or whatever. And they were like, what are you doing? One time he was taking transportation with Felix, and some people saw him and were like, oh, Rudolf, what are you doing hanging out with this, illiterate gardener? Like, come on. And Steiner was like, I couldn't believe basically the impression that people had of him. They didn't realize the incredible worlds he could see into. And he would tell him intimately about each plant and all its different properties and herbs and things. But eventually, it's Felix who will introduce Steiner to the Rosicrucian master that will open him up to a whole different level of awareness right around the age of 30. And Steiner will have that kind of remarkable experience. But I do think that it's fascinating as we look along the way and we see, Steiner, essentially what I've realized over the course of 4 decades was trying to warn us essentially about 2 things. But through that whole period, it's over and over again, it's this AHRIMAN thing. So if it was just, something humanity had to be aware of, included in there, maybe a lecture or 2, whatever, but it's there. Go through it. AHRIMAN shows up over and over again. The technological takeover, the dark astral aspect through AHRIMAN is there over and over again. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Debbie McAdoo says spiders were the creepy little spies in the movie Minority Report.
Hey, it's true.
Yeah, Julietta the Spirit says spiders associated with Maya, the weaver of illusion.
Yeah.
And Twilight Miss says, interesting how the moon is included in the 8th sphere and is a known construct, hollowish, rings like a bell, and locked in a static orbit with only one face towards us, a mask at all times.
Oh, yeah. And a lot of people have come up with all these ideas that the moon is somebody's ship that was parked there. But in Steiner's cosmology, and I have to say this goes across the board for mystery teachings, the moon comes out of the earth. And it actually represents an incredible, vulnerable period for humanity when AHRIMAN sneaks in, because it's such a trauma. And it's funny, people haven't made this connection who study these types of things. But if you look at Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, which is Gurdjieff's book, and, the Sarmung Brotherhood and all the schools he was associated with, he tells this story about humanity developing this organ called a Kunde buffer, which allows them to see things kind of not as they are, because it was too terrifying when the moon was leaving the earth. They had to develop this artificial organ in order to cope with it. I always found that interesting as kind of reinforcement about this whole story of the moon leaving the earth as a traumatic period for humanity. That is one of the drawings that Steiner made of the 8th sphere. And it has to be taken deeply in, just seeing what it encompasses. It encompasses the moon and earth. That is the home of the 8th sphere. It's not a physical body, but it can be seen with clairvoyant vision. So they're capturing the realm, as it were, or there's an attempt there to capture. There's a couple more things. Of course, Steiner's sculpture of AHRIMAN. And when he talks about having done this, he'll say, the sculpture of AHRIMAN, as I tuned into him, I started to feel very heavy, like I was encased in granite. So it's very hard even to do this because the heaviness of Ahriman is so intense and so foreign to Steiner's spiritual essence. And he starts to feel like he can bring this image of him forward. But it's a pretty, it's certainly, as an image, it's a terrifying image. The last thing I want to show you here on the picture side is that shot of Blavatsky with a very, very psychic gaze. And I want to say this about Blavatsky, which is, the traditional thing likes to say, oh, she's a charlatan and all this stuff. Look, you don't have people like Rudolf Steiner going to bat for you unless you're the real deal. And, Blavatsky was there before anybody, and she brought the things forward. Now, she was laid into, they psychically, did the occult imprisonment, so she saw some things through a glass darkly and they distorted aspects of her own vision. But, let's have it clear. I mean, her work represents an entire revolution of thought. And so there's a great essence of what she brought forward there. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Okay, I've got 3 for you. Don Neway, did Rudolf Steiner have a sense of artificial intelligence coming and its impact on society? Raycasting said, did DJ hear Trump talk about companies being able to have their own source of energy aside from the regular power grid? That we need to double the energy output to support AI? Thoughts?
Oh, yeah.
And Bella Clark says, what if Starlink is a web being built around us, trapping us inside?
Oh, yeah. I've never liked Starlink. I always thought that Musk got away with a lot by having Starlink. The way that it's set up, there are certainly ways to do it. But the idea that it knocks out the night sky and it's just, it's more domination from space of everything on the ground, which I think should worry everyone. There's a lot of things there because you could have anyone else who's not Musk or whatever. I think the problem with Musk is that he's being, again, there have been some good things that have happened, obviously, through X and things like that. And him throwing his support to President Trump, I think, is important because, facing the Harris-Waltz oblivion that we were facing, and make no mistake, it was going to be oblivion, and the free speech censorship and all the things that were coming in through that. The administration we got is infinitely better. But that said, I don't think that Musk needs to be as much of a player in it. And I think that he's sucking the energy out of the room for Trump and creating issues, even though he might be writing the checks for support and all the rest. So for example, I think with Doge and things like that, Rand Paul, as a senator, and who's been doing this for years and years, would be better to lead up an effort like that. And, you always hear people and they'll say, oh, well, Elon Musk said that Ron Paul is going to audit the Fed or something. Listen to Ron Paul. He says he can't audit the Fed. The Fed has been doing what they're doing for so long. And so they just kind of roll this thing out there like, oh, see, Ron Paul is involved with this, or Rand Paul, and he's not. Now, those guys might approve in theory of what Doge is because, everybody wants to get through that cost-cutting thing. But we have to be careful because of the military contracting side of the advanced technology piece that Musk represents through SpaceX and the connection with DARPA. We don't want them having the personal information of everyday citizens. So you have to be careful. You have to balance that process when you're doing it. This is my only thing about the early part of the Trump administration here. Like I say, graded 100 days out because a lot of good things are happening. But there's a problem if you rely too much on executive orders, because what did we learn about executive orders? The minute the next guy gets in, he can undo all of them. He can just sit down there one day and write them all off. So you need a process that goes through Congress and the Senate to establish law. And, you want to do that. And so what you can reverse a bunch of things with the executive orders, good, but you better have a very, very strong, you better be prepared with a very strong pitch through the Congress and the Senate, because that's where you're going to have the influence. And right now, the Republicans have the House and the Senate. So it's very important for them to move those things through, not just in executive orders that can be undone by the next guy, and not just in Musk hanging out, causing problems. You know, there has to be, like, you have to go in with a thing like that saying, we're looking for accountability for the government. Here's our accountability. We've got these 100 guys, they're tested, and they're under security oath, and no, they can't give away any of that privacy information. And they're led up by a senator who has legislative experience, like Rand Paul, who's trusted on this issue. That's the kind of direction you want to take. You don't want to have, you know, WWF style Musk coming out with a chainsaw bang, I'm Doge baby with sunglasses, you know, while his baby mamas are complaining on Twitter about what a louse he is, you know. So it's bad look for Trump, and he doesn't need it. You know, you might need the check, but, you know, limit it. You're the president now, and Musk can, you know, he can perform a role and all that, but right now it's overextended. It's just too far out there. And I think that the what it's representing is something of, you know, this aerospace aspect coming into government. So you have to be very, very careful with it. And, you know, some good results may come out of that association, but at the same time, you better keep a real tight rein on it, and don't let it, you know, if you're the Trump administration, don't let Musk overshadow you and what you're trying to do with your agenda, which, you know, in the first month, people are talking more about Musk and his stuff than Trump's agenda. That's not good. So try to keep that balance in mind as you go forth. Yes.
Don Neway, in some ways, Larry Ellison of Oracle is more of a player than Elon, since his systems and networks are so embedded in systems for decades. G. Myers-Gilmer says, is Larry Ellison's project Stargate and its work with AI in the field of custom individual vaccinations a stream of AHRIMAN and the Eighth Sphere? Also, G. Myers-Gilmer. Steiner spoke of inoculations that would stamp down passion for spirituality.
Oh, yeah.
This is the true purpose of these modern experimental gene therapies.
Oh, there's no question. And Steiner was way ahead on that, saying that what they're going to do is find a way through this process of separating humanity from their spirituality through something like that. So, you know, he's giving us those snapshots there, and I think it's very valuable. There are dangers in different types of setups. So the setup that we had with the Biden-Harris administration represented extreme danger to any kind of version of democracy that you can think of, and certainly dangerous to the Constitution, free speech, and all the rest of it. So, you know, we identified that, and I think with Trump's work, he was able to put forward the right initiative of ending the war in Ukraine, revitalizing the economy, shoring up the border. You know, it's an America, it's an American ideal. That's the good part. That's what needs to be emphasized. I think the other stuff, you know, I don't think Musk should be center stage. I'd put him, I'd revert him, and I would also have him treat the role with more respect than he's been doing. So you have to do that. But the Trump agenda coming in, you know, there's so many good things that can come out of that America version, and that he can do all these things on a national, international stage. And, you know, everything from getting men out of women's sports, you know, there's just so many good things that can happen with what he's doing. You just have to be careful not to give your enemies, in this case the Democrats, material with which they can unravel you with. And you have to remember it's a very small percentage of people in the middle that give you the support to govern. So, you know, you have to be aware of that, I think, as you go. So it's an important aspect, and that's my kind of advice for the Trump people at this point, which is, you know, Trump has the agenda. Just push the agenda, but push it through Congress, push it through the Senate. Don't have it just be executive orders, because there's a limit, because those executive orders can be undone. So get it, if it happens through the House, if it happens through the Senate, and you sign it as the president, it's much more of a lock. And so we need more of that. Yes.
Okay. Back to dreaming. DJ says, the dream police. Don Nue says, I wonder if sleep studies were being done during MK Ultra experiments in the Allen Memorial Center in Montreal. Rose Thistle Artwork says, the Have You Seen This Guy in Your Dreams posters were possibly to see if their Delta Wave tech was working. The guy looks like Geordie Rose, owner of D-Wave. I mean, exactly like Geordie Rose. Pretty weird that he has a company called D-Wave when it was Delta Waves being studied.
Geordie who?
Geordie Rose of D-Wave.
Oh, yeah. That is interesting. I think what you're up against and what you're going to be seeing is there are kind of strange and unusual crisscrosses. What it reminds me of is when people had so many real things about the Mandela effect, and then this kind of junk conspiracy thing came in with like false versions of the Mandela effect, but the genuine ones were unusual because they were evidence of somebody playing with the medium of reality itself. So, when we talk about things like apotheum and things like that, where you distort reality, well, if you change things, it's quite interesting. In 1984, of course, they go back and change the past headlines to line up with the current reality. There is the tempering and the invention of the reality, and that is why digital systems are also highly untrustworthy, because at a certain point when they were really on a big let's get rid of free speech kick, they were going back and changing articles and changing things that had already taken place. And there was so many of us know the Wayback Machine, and it's just an archive or a record of what happens on the internet. You go in there and you say, I'm looking for this thing from 2015 or whatever, as it was on the internet at the time. Well, the people who ran that put out a statement while all this was going on a couple of years ago, saying basically that, whatever needs to happen in order to keep us compliant will do, meaning they'll go back and tamper in the Wayback Machine. So that version of reality, that it doesn't get changed and that it can't be flipped into some other timeline by people manipulating the past, is very important. By the way, just since I've been doing the show, there are so many things that are inaccessible now that I could get, a few years ago. Images, documents, all kinds of things. Things just disappear. And they're suppressed, they're put away, they become impossible. They become rights protected. So it's a very real thing about the manipulation of reality. Yes.
Cece says, mysteries passed down verbally. What's the chance of the grapevine game changing theories behind the mystery schools?
Well, you just made an excellent point, which is there are certain mystery traditions that are only oral traditions. So they're kept in that way, so no one ever has them in a book form, etc. Now, one of the things I didn't get around to tonight, but I want to mention it as laying the groundwork for something coming up, is that Steiner, towards the end of his life, he spends a lot of time talking about 1879. Remember I was talking about crucial years? Well, this is very unusual because Steiner was saying that the mystery schools could see on a spiritual level all of these dark forces coming out of the spiritual realm and into the earth. Now, if they had been in the spiritual realm, then the good spiritual forces would not be able to come down to us. This is, all in Steiner's version of this. So it's recorded as the Archangel Michael fighting against these forces and winning a great victory in 1879. All of the mystery schools had agreed upon this. So, and they saw it in different ways. The people who were in the power zone were looking at it and saying, this is going to be more difficult for us. But also on the Steiner level, he was seeing all these dark forces are going to be active now because he's been thrown out of the spiritual realm and directly onto the earth now. And so the real battle taking place here, shaping up. So when you see things in Steiner's lifetime that he's talking about World War I, he sees a war coming up after. That's World War II, clearly. And when he looks at it, he says, in times past, we've had wars, and they were caused by different groups not getting along or whatever, humanity issues. This is different. And it relates directly to this 1879 thing. Now, it's funny because it's a victory and it causes some issues. Now, in steganography, I've mentioned Johannes Trithemius, very, very interesting character who becomes an abbot at the age of 21 in Germany. Something just incredible about this guy. What happens is he has these incredible spiritual realizations, and he's creating these mystical texts, and then he realizes, aha, if I let this out, they're going to do like the Inquisition on me. And what I need to do is operate the way the Greeks did with steganography and create a page within a page. And so he ultimately will write the keys to steganography and all the rest. The scrolls that he will vouchsafe will get discovered later in an antique shop and form the basis of the Golden Dawn in the 19th century, if you follow how these dots connect over time. Trithemius will write this big opus, and he's writing to the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. And he says to him, these are the crucial things that are coming up. And here's the big spiritual war. Here's the major date for you. And he gives him this date in November of 1879. It's the same year that Steiner is giving for this great war that takes place in the spiritual realm. Now, the dates are important because, there's a numerology track, but there's a track that you can see that the mystery schools have let out on purpose. So let's look at some of the dates briefly. 1841 is when scientific materialism gets introduced on the level that the mystery schools need to do something about it. It's introduced in Germany by a group of scientists, and one of the key scientists who introduces it isn't any older than 24 years old. It's very strange. 1879 is highlighted by the mystery schools, Trithemius and Steiner, as this great, battling of these dark forces in the spiritual realm thrown down to earth. 1936 is a date that Edgar Cayce gives us, and it's quite fascinating because what he says is that the Earth's position shifts, and that as a result, all these Earth changes are being set up coming forward for humanity over the course of a couple hundred years. But something else is taking place there with that shift, which is the pyramid, the Great Pyramid in Giza, was set up to record this event. So whatever that shift is for humanity, it's recorded there, according to Steiner, according to Cayce. Now, if you go forward, Cayce talks next about 1958 being a crucial year. That's when we had the International Geophysical Year. We had all these various things I've described about going to Antarctica and making these discoveries in the ionosphere and the discovery of the laser. In 1998 is the next year that Cayce highlights. In 1998, Steiner will talk about 1998 and say that the power of 666 times 3 is 1998. It sets a whole different era to the fore, and the very best and the very worst are going to come together and clash. And the war of all against all is off there in the distance. And that's this whole Ahrimanic era. It's when the spiritual blinders come off, but this other thing comes off, which is their complete domination of the earth through this nanotech, AI, virtual reality piece. It's all on. So that's the era that we're in. And that's why things are so unusual in the world, because that clash is there. But the mystery schools have left these markers of time, giving us the dates and things to let us know the flow of things that we're in. And certainly there's a number of dates that are coming up as well. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Nutter Butter says the Schumann resonance is rising lately from 7.77 hertz to gradually to 8.0 hertz, the eighth sphere. And Kevin Bauman says, resonance, it's about time someone mentioned it.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I think, and this is also the sensitivity to vibration as well. When you think about it, one of the things I think that we have happening in this period is this incredible memory of Atlantis at a crucial point. And I think so many of the people who are around now are Atlanteans. And the Atlanteans, according to Casey, are unusual in everything. And at a certain point in the work of Casey and Steiner, whatever they could think of, they could do. So if they thought, I'm going to some other part of the universe in this craft, that's where they would be. And they had incredible psychic mastery over the physical environment. And, they broke up by splitting off into these groups, and they have wars for years between the Belial and the Emilius group. And ultimately, the Emilius group is overtaken, and they, their stronghold is there in Poseidia. That's where, the hot zone activity takes place. That's where we see the unusual geopolitics around that area. And I think what we're looking at is that rediscovery in that part of the Bahamas, Cuba, Bimini, that Casey was giving us about Bimini rising and things. It's that memory of the Atlantean aspect. And one of the things that Steiner warns about is, he says, there's going to be so many things happening for humanity that will look like advances, but what's actually happening is they're memories from Atlantis. They're not even new discoveries. They are memories from Atlantis coming to the fore, and there are groups seeking them out, like the Powerzone. That translates a lot for me into groups like the CIA looking into things like the UFO file, psychic experience, remote viewing, and all the rest of it. So I think it's a very modern interpretation of what he was getting at. And so, yeah, that takes us, I think, into some very interesting places. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. This is X Series 189. It's the Powerzone Mystery School 8th Sphere AI. It's Steiner's vision of AHRIMAN in the 21st century. Yes, he sees those nano spiders causing very big problems for humanity if we don't wake up to that level of technological invasion. We're going to take a couple more questions from you here. I want to remind you, if you're new here, to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. It's a free newsletter, but it keeps us in touch with each other, and you're going to learn incredible things about what we have coming up for you, what's in store, great interviews, documentaries, of course, deep dive into the new JFK files that will be coming out, and just remarkable things, X-Series episodes that'll blow your mind, and live events. It's all in there in the newsletter. Go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for that newsletter, and stand up and be counted. Get behind the program while you're at it. All right, Miss Olivia, we'll take the last couple of questions.
Chris Lothian, did Steiner ever talk about Armageddon and whether it might be a spiritual battle as opposed to just one big physical battle on Earth?
Well, both Steiner and Casey talk about Armageddon and talk about Revelations. What I will say, Steiner understands that the apprehension of the reality by John of Patmos, what he's looking at, he can see, he's in the mystical vision. One of the things that Casey had to say, which I found so fascinating about Armageddon, was that it was a battle between the souls returning to and the souls leaving from the earth. And the idea was it was the prevention of these higher forces from coming into the earth evolutionary cycle, a block, as it were. And he said it is a war in the air, which I also found very fascinating. So yeah, Armageddon for sure is a reality. And the question is, what is it really that when you bring it down from a mystical level, like the seals of Revelation and things of this nature, coming directly out of the mystical Christianity, you're getting something so esoteric there as an influence that symbolically it may be one of the most important books that we have at our fingertips. as far as the interpretation goes. And, it's interesting. I think I have this here. I wanted to mention this about reincarnation. I think it's so crucial as an aspect, the more that I see it in Steiner's work when he talks about apprehending those various incarnations. I'm going to read to you a list of incarnations of Jesus according to Edgar Casey. And let's see what you think of these. First of all, as Emilius. Now that really makes sense because Emilius was the one in Atlantis who led us into the work of the two-eye crystal and all these different things. Now, interesting, Adam. Adam comes after Emilius, and I find that interesting. Sometimes Casey would say Emilius as Adam. Very, very unusual. Enoch, Hermes, Melchizedek, Joseph, who was sold into slavery by his brothers, as we know, the multicolored coat, Joshua, Asaph, who was a musician, Jeshua, Zend, who was the father of Zoroaster. This is also interesting because Casey has a lifetime during that period. And Casey would say that Jesus, before attaining Christ, would live some 30 lives. And it was, basically, this is a process for humanity, which is it takes 30 lives to perfect yourself on Earth and move on to other systems. It's also very interesting that Casey would say that Arcturus was the doorway, and that when you left the system, it's through Arcturus, and that very often those who have graduated the levels and gone on through the Great White Brotherhood and other places to become ascended masters stay here and don't move on to other realms, whatever, because they want to continue to lift the whole culture up. And so this is part of that. We're getting the track of what the mystery schools are all about there. Yes, Miss Olivia.
Xander says, nanospiders, how about hacking into your biofield through wireless body area networks, W-band? This is something that we need to focus on more.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Well, you're in a technological field, My dad was obsessed with electricity, interestingly enough, and would always tell me various things about it that I always found interesting. But one of the things that he was instantly adopted to, he instantly got, was that electricity changes your perception. So, if somebody's living off the grid somewhere, which is very hard to do in this hyper technology environment that we have, then their consciousness is different. So, they always say that trees affect the writing mood and all the rest of it. But I think their psychic life becomes very different. And I think that there is something in that whole, adoption of electricity, that we're in a different age where the electricity, is something else. It's another factor that is bringing us into this other stage. And that is a stage of evolution that's very easy to see, from the early 19th century where it didn't exist to, its implementation almost all over the world. So I think understanding the fundamentals of electricity and how electricity is life brings us, it connects us in a sense with a larger version of what reality is. And so you have the power of it on the level of like a lightning bolt, but you also have electricity as a human factor, which is that human beings are electrical. So you're in an electrical field, you're in an electrical system. And when you bring that up, all you have to do is say everyone's in a kind of a spiritual electromagnetic environment. Yes.
Well, you think about somebody who's died. What do? They shock the heart, right?
Oh,
the
yes.
electricity, so it's in some sense, it's life itself. It's the difference between life and death. It's fascinating.
Shot to the heart, and you're to blame. You get the quote of the night right there. I have one last quote to read, and then we'll take your last question. How's that?
Okay,
Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're wrapping up X Series episode 189, the Powerzone Mystery School, 8th Sphere AI. I'm going to bring in more about how the Powerzone operates now in my next version of this episode. But I wanted to read something that gives us kind of just a straight... this was important. This is about 1879 that Steiner gives us. Quote, early in the 1840s, those brotherhoods who have knowledge of spiritual impulses that play into history saw coming on that battle of certain spiritual beings and higher spirits, which terminated in 1879 when certain angel beings, spirits of darkness, were cast down, an event symbolized by the victory of Michael over the dragon. When, therefore, in the middle of the 19th century, these brotherhoods felt that this event was approaching, they had to decide what attitude to take towards it and to consider what should be done. These brothers, who wished above all to reckon with the demands of the moment, were actuated up to a certain point with the best intentions, but they were mistaken in their approach to materialism at the time. They thought that men who were prepared to accept only what would be known in physical terms should be offered something from the spiritual world in a materialistic form. So it was with good intentions that spiritualism was launched on the world in the 1840s. That's directly from The Wrong and Right Use of Esoteric Knowledge. Quite fascinating indeed. Miss Olivia, what do you got?
Just want to add this. Gigi says, different Gigi. Growing up in a rural area 75 years ago, we were more spiritual and aware of life. We were living in nature, not concrete.
Wow.
I also wanted to mention, I mentioned in the chat that I recently bought grounding sheets.
Oh, interesting.
And I have not had a problem with sleep since.
They
are the greatest thing in the world.
Wow.
So changing your frequency, I mean, nothing is more, my acupuncturist said, two things are the most important: hydration and proper sleep. And that's it. So, but
yeah. What about sunshine?
Well, he never mentioned sunshine to me, but those two things.
I know you like vitamin D. That's a big one. I wanted to plug in a couple of quick things here to round this whole thing out. This is just another Steiner quote that I think fits along with this whole aspect. These forces and energies also exist and take effect independent of human beings, just as the forces of nature are independent of human beings. Demons, elemental powers, are active in them, but their efforts on human beings differ from those of the elemental powers that human beings perceived in the phenomena of nature in the past. Then people would look at the phenomena of nature and say, elemental spirits are at work there. And again, the elemental being nature spirits and things that we know from, Findhorn and other places. These have crept in to modern life at different times. People still have the ability to see them. Elemental spirits are at work in there. They had an effect on the conscious awareness. The soul came to an understanding that the phenomena of nature and the conscious mind could relate to those phenomena. They have not the least idea that demonic spirits are active in the whole world of technology created by the human race. Nor will they find it easy to see this, because these powers are acting on the will. And I have often told you that the will is asleep. They work at an unconscious level, taking hold of the unconscious human mind. The consequence is as follows. In the past, human beings had at least some awareness of demonic powers. Today, demonic powers are restively stirring in all products of technology. Their activities extend into the sphere of the human will, but human beings are not yet inclined to accept this. In the first place, These things are at an unconscious level. And in the second place, people feel it would be superstitious to say that demonic spirits are active in the machines they have produced. So this is important because you don't want to be superstitious. And we know those people who just attribute demons to everything, you know. Sometimes when I talk about the UFO file, somebody will email me and just say, oh, it's all demons, you know, which I don't believe. And, you know, you have to be able to sort these things, and you have to be able to understand with clear vision what's what. You know, Foo Fighters doing the same formations as planes in World War II, and we didn't know anything about the UFO file, really. You know, they're not demons. Why were they doing the formation? So, you know, who's operating some of that stuff? And yet, on the other hand, we've become so desensitized from that superstitious kind of thing that the idea that something would be demonic becomes, you know, absurd. So there's some balance there in our thinking that needs to adopt. So we need to be aware, on one hand, of these kind of ahrimanic astral activities, and on the other hand, not have a kind of a knee-jerk reaction that everything is demonic. And with that, Miss Olivia, your last question.
I'm not going to ask any question. I am going to ask my question.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, before we started the show tonight, I always do a prayer before the show. And the phrase that came up in my prayer was human soul warmth. And I wanted to bring this up because, you know, beyond any kind of intellectualism around the eighth sphere and around any spider beings or anything like that, you know, we can get really deep into that. And
the spiders from Mars.
Could we just? I like to keep things very basic. In prayer and meditation, isn't it just a matter of making sure that we cultivate, you know, human soul warmth? Just however that, but just to connect with that feeling and to emanate that.
Oh, there's no question.
As far as
I absolutely
freeing
agree.
ourselves from the consciousness of the eighth sphere.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things that Steiner talked about, there's two things that really remind me of that. One of them is that he talked about how humanity, by its feelings towards Christ, would create the etheric body, the warmth of the etheric body of Christ. That is the second coming. Not a physical reincarnation of Christ, but an incarnation of the etheric body, the warmth through their devotional activity. The other thing is that he always talked about something which becomes confusing because Vulcan is a term that was used in many ways, but it's another one of these spheres that we can't see with our physical eyes. But the warmth of Vulcan, which is developing as a planet, is something that humanity is set to develop toward, and that warmth of Vulcan creates New Jupiter, which is basically the next version of Earth, and that's New Jerusalem in the Bible and all the rest of it. With, you know, and they mentioned the whole 144,000, and you know, it's interesting because Steiner will talk about how that's 12 times 12, and it goes on. But it's very interesting to me because he says that the activities of Ahriman interfere with humanity's spiritual evolution so that we don't create the warmth of Vulcan and New Jupiter never gets created. So that's how the interference operates. And so looking at it and giving us this 4 decades of research that Steiner was laying out, he was trying to say this Ahrimanic force will enter and have its height of technology, height of power through the technology in the 21st century. And an actual physical incarnation of Ahriman will take place. So he's giving us something there that before we can move forward into a different kind of spiritual life and a different kind of new world, there's this face-off against this thing. And that's the period that we're in. So I think it's very valuable that Steiner gave that to us. And now the question is, what do we do with it? And I think it's a process. It's a day-by-day awakening process, but there's lots of hints in the work that Steiner left behind. And with that, Miss Olivia, we're going to wrap up tonight.
Okay. All right. Let me get this lined up here. All right.
There's
From
one
the
for you.
beginning, I would like
Cosmic
to
memory.
thank
Yes.
Cult Fan, Song of Prayer, Bill, I Am an I and I, Jake, Thomas Ball, Crime Scene, Stephen Spencer Dio, Debbie McAdoo, The Bikini Truther, Eurythmia's Fun, G. Myers Gilmer, Barry7676, Robert Scott, Ray Story, Erica Swenson Elliott, C.A. Beverforden, Jenny Renko, Slow Morrison, Descat Brock, E.M. Kevin Bauman, Mike Brosnahan, Brian Whitaker, Infinitum Neo, Doyle Wayne, Empire of Light, John Matthews. And that's what we got tonight. Thank you so much for your generous super chats.
Wow, incredible. We appreciate your support. And of course, to all our subscribers, thank you. We couldn't do what we do without our members and to all the well-meaning people who get behind the work that we do. And we sure appreciate it. We will continue to bring forward the deep research and information for you. And there's some very exciting things that are coming up. Before we go, I'll do a couple of shout outs here. Who we got out there? Corey Anderson. Great job. Thank you. Thank you, Corey. Scarlet Fire. Don New Way. The kingdom of heaven is here. Hey, that's a great quote. John Gauze. Robert Klein. Gigi, I walk barefoot in the ground on the grass for grounding. That's great. Thanks, DJ and Miss Olivia. More on Elon. They say, yeah. Thank you, DJ Olivia and Ideas people. The Ideas Room was outstanding tonight, Miss Olivia.
Outstanding.
A nice round of applause for you as well. Tina Boric. It's good to see you out there. Thank you. Conrad Clark. Johann Wolf. Wow. Rex. Nina says. Great show, says Rex. Thank you very much, sir. It's great to have you here. Great episode. Doc Roswell. Thanks you for being here, Doc. Juliet of the Spirit. Wow, the gang's all here. Don Neway, what is that? This one has been a good one, dealing with the dark side of Apotheum. Boy, is that true. You're getting right down to it. Reality distortion on overdrive. Good night, X-Fam from Najat. It's good to see you out there. Fantastic. I know Kate's out there. It's great to see you. Gypsy Moon. John Gao. We love you, Olivia and DJ. John Goss. Thank you very much, sir. We love you back. It's great to have so many of you here. Subtle moments of absurdity. Yeah, what do you got?
I was just thinking, I mean, if you really want to, if you want to break it down, Belial versus the Amelia's group, it really is, evolution. It's the intention behind self-development. Do you do it for service to self, for empowerment, so that you can, will what you want here on the earth plane? Or is it about evolving your ability to love and forgive and...
There's something else going on
yeah,
there.
just
Yes.
service to others. And it's pretty basic, to understand. But it is hard because you constantly have to bend the knee, to God,
Oh, that's
to
true.
higher forces.
Yeah.
And it is ultimately a humbling task. In some ways, I don't blame anybody. The older I get, the more I realize I don't blame anybody for taking the other path. I get it, because
Yes.
it is
Oh, yeah.
so taking the hard road, the one of service, and I think humiliation very often. But I wouldn't have it any other way. But I do have sympathy in some ways for the other.
Oh, yeah. Well, I like there's a Steiner quote, which is, he who's worthy of being challenged is worthy of a crown. So that's important for us to keep in mind. And, but that's very, very important. I absolutely agree. The road less traveled, that's what they used to call it. Tim Houston. Thank you for being out there, sir. I think you're in Australia, so good night in Oz, or is it good morning? Fantastic. Darcy Edwards, Buccaneers, fantastic group out there tonight. We will see you all next week. There's Lisa Davis. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. Gratitude always supports. I'm happy you and Olivia do this work you love. Thank you, Lisa. We're just glad to have you here with us. And to all our folks out there, thanks so much for being with us here tonight. We'll see you all next week. And we have a very exciting show planned for you as well. It's great to have so many of you here with us tonight in the Ideas Room to go over the Powerzone Mystery School and Rudolf Steiner's daring ideas of Eighth Sphere, AI, and AHRIMAN. So it says end broadcast, but after all,
Never really ends.
it never really ends, and we will see you all next week.
God bless everybody.
Never let it be forgot. Once there was a Camelot. And hey, some interesting things are happening. Thank you, Eurythmy. Have a great night, everyone.